Okay, welcome everybody to this morning's meeting. We're joined today by Pat Kenny from Deloitte, who will be presenting item 3, which is the external audit report on the 21-22 annual accounts. And we also have Laura Miller, who's the senior manager at North Ayrshire Council and members of the corporate fraud team. And for item 4, we will be welcoming Zach O'Neill, Head of Counter Fraud Profession from Scottish Government, who will be joining us online. And we also have members of our own internal audit team, so welcome everybody. Okay, can call for setting. Apologies, please, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Sederant, Councillor Lillian Jones.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Watts.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor David Richardson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen Canning.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Mabin.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Beverly Clark.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Sally Cogley.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor William Lennox.
Morning, here.
Councillor June Kyle. Apologies from Councillor Kyle. Thank you. Councillor Jennifer Hogg.
Here.
Thank you. And Councillor Elaine Stewart.
Here, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, do we have any declarations of interest? Nope. Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to the previous minutes. Okay, I wasn't here at the last meeting, so you have the minutes of that minute, Neil. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I believe they are, yeah.
Thank you very much. And is there any matters arising from the minute?
Yes, please.
Councillor Mabin?
Page 5. It was item 5 about out with placements. Reporting back to elected members on progress in relation to practitioner retention, development and recruitment. Wondering if we've got a recruitment update on that, please.
Chair, this was a matter which I think Charles Rocks is looking at. Charles presented the report the last time. I believe he's got it under consideration, but as far as I'm aware, I can check with Charles after the meeting and update you, but I don't think there is a report back from Charles just currently.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other matters arising? Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Paragraph 7 in the first page, the third bullet point, the annual assurance statement. So we're acknowledging that completion of the electoral installation, the report says that will be completed by December 22. I note that there was 289 outstanding. As of today, how many do we still have outstanding?
An update on that as well, please, Stuart.
Again, Chair, I think that information has been circulated to members following the last meeting. I'll need to double check and confirm again to Councillor Stewart and the members of the committee, if that's okay, Chair, following the meeting, but I'm sure that information has been circulated already.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Are there any other matters?
Can I just come back in, Chair?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Councillor Stewart. Yeah.
That information was circulated, but I'm asking, as of today, how far are we into that? Because 289, they've got to be sorted out by December 22. We are now in November 22, so we've got a month and a bit to sort that out. So I'm just looking to see, like, where are we now?
So just a progress report then. Oh, David, want to come in here?
Yeah, Chair, to be helpful, obviously we'll take that further ask away, but it's just to make the point that this is obviously the minute from the last meeting. This reflects reports that were there at the last meeting, and to be fair, officers come and attend in accordance with items on the agenda. So to ask for an update today when colleagues from that service aren't present isn't the most efficient way for us to operate. We did follow up. The information that was requested at the time of the meeting was provided for, and we will pass on the request, but it's just to flag up to members that you don't need to wait to governance and scrutiny to ask heads of service for a progress report, and it would probably be quicker and more efficient to direct those inquiries to those colleagues, because all we can do is pass it on, which just slows it down. So apologies for that, but as I say, this is the minute from the last meeting. We can't anticipate. I mean, you wouldn't expect us to have all colleagues here just to answer questions or give updates that might arise. So it's just to make the point to all members, appreciate we're all finding our feet, that there's no obligation on you to wait for the minute to come back if you wish further progress. But we will pass on the request. I'm just pointing out it's not the best way to work, but we'll pass it on, and Stuart will obtain, and we'll circulate further information in terms of the position as at today's date.
Okay, David, that's noted. Thank you very much. Are there any other matters regarding the minute? No. Okay. So we'll move on to item 3, which is the external audit reports in the 21-22 annual accounts. Is that you, Joe?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. I'm very conscious we've got a full agenda today, so I'll be very quick with this, and I don't want to steal Pat's thunder either, and grateful to Pat for being on the call today. Essentially, members, what I'd like to do is just to give you some update on the report you're about to hear. It's from our external auditor. That's been Deloitte for the last 6 years, and 6 years is unusual. Normally it's 5 years, but because of COVID, that was extended by Audit Scotland to 6. This is the final year that we have Deloitte as our external auditor, and Pat will present the report today, conclude the audit, and then demit. And Audit Scotland will be our new auditors for the years that will take us through to 2027. The report that Pat will provide is a comprehensive audit of our annual financial statements. It's an audit that began in July. It concluded a matter of days ago. I hope, Pat, and it doesn't keep going, but it runs for many months, and a team come in and they do a comprehensive audit of the council. It's good to see that some of those long-standing points around sound financial management remain, and grateful to Pat and colleagues for picking up those important points for this committee. At that point, with your permission, Chair, I'll pause and introduce Pat to come in and present his findings.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Okay, Pat, would you like to present the report? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. And again, I'll be relatively brief, but happy to take any questions that the committee might have. At the outset, I'd just like to thank Joe and his team for all their courtesy and help over the last 6 years. And it's been a very quick 6 years. And we've enjoyed our relationship with the council, and best of luck going forward to everyone. In terms of this year's audit, I'm pleased to report that it's a clean audit opinion, and an unmodified audit opinion, which is obviously good news. There were 5 adjustments to the draft financial statements, which are detailed in our report on page 31. One of them was material in relation to property valuations, but Joe and the team have corrected the financial statements for that. We presented to the committee in June our wider scope report, which basically summarises our conclusions on the wider scope dimensions, which are financial sustainability, financial management, governance, and transparency, and value for money. And I'm very pleased to note that I think we leave as auditors with the council in a very strong position in all of those key aspects of the wider scope. As Joe mentioned, a strong financial management team, strong governance. We do note that, like every public sector body, the council does have very significant challenges in the medium and longer term as regarding financial sustainability, and that is an issue, obviously, that this committee and the council will be should keep closely on the radar going forward. That was all I was going to say this morning, Chair, but as always, very happy to take any questions the committee might have. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Pat. Thank you. Do you have any questions, comments for Pat? Councillor Cannon?
Hi there. Thanks for the introduction. Can I just ask what is on page experience loss is mentioned somewhere, sorry. Page 28. How is the what is that and how is it calculated?
Good question. Basically, it's relation to pensions liabilities and the valuation there. And actuaries, when they make their assessment on liabilities, make various assumptions going forward. And what experience the assessment is there any difference between assumptions made in the past and actual performance? So it's an adjustment based on what has actually happened as opposed to assumptions that have been made in the past.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought it was something to do with retirements and loss of experience in the council and some sort of subjective valuation of that, but that's thanks for that. Thanks for.
Councillor Richardson?
Could I just ask a question about page 27, the Strathclyde Pension Fund? Obviously administered by Glasgow City Council, but East Ayrshire employees pay into that fund as well. There's just a note there. The net pension liability has decreased from just over 183 million to just over 65 million in 2021-2022. The decrease is a combination of an increase of 86 million in the fair value of the assets and a reduction of 31 million in the liabilities as a result of demographic changes and financial assumptions. Can we just have a wee bit more information around that, if possible?
That might be one for Joe actually to take in detail. That's a regular assessment that the actuary will make, and it's based on specific circumstances relating to the council. So it's probably one for Joe that more than me, if that's all right.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So maybe going back a bit, councils have a pension reserve on their balance sheet. It's similar to the requirements and accounting liabilities that would affect private sector companies. Councillor Canning, I think in June, made a point about a cost that went through the I&E that was allowed to be removed when it went into the movement in reserves. That same transaction, that same process takes place for pensions, where we do adjustments so that as the pension reserves goes up or down, it doesn't impact on the council's council tax levels. What's happened in this case, and this is fairly recent, this is fairly not recent, but it's fairly ongoing. You tend to see that the pension reserves moves quite significantly each year. What's happened this year, it's fallen considerably because of two things. The first is that the assets that are held by Strathclyde Pension Fund, in which the East Ayrshire pot is part, has increased in value. And they have property assets and investments in very many organisations. And so the value of that investment fund as such has increased. And so we get a share of that benefit. And that benefit is twofold. It's the actual increase that's taken place. And the majority of Strathclyde Pension Fund's assets or investments are in dollars. So we then get a currency gain when they're brought back from dollar into sterling. So we got a double gain. The other part that's happened here is that there are demographic changes in terms of the assumptions, and that essentially, in layman's terms, the demographic change will be twofold. It will be regarding the number of people who are in the scheme will be a small part of it, and the most significant part of it will be that the actuarial assumptions around mortality will have changed, and probably, unfortunately, their assumptions around when members and pensioners will cease drawing their benefits because they have passed away is now a shorter period than they had previously imagined. So they'll pay out for less of a period, and at the same time, investment values are increasing. So it's a double gain this year, and I think that hopefully gives the response that you're after, Councillor.
No, thanks for that, Joe. That does explain it a bit. Cheers.
Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Canning.
Just on the back of that, now correct me if I'm wrong on those, so we've had a really bad few weeks and months with the stock market and investments. Will that have an impact on our pensions or on us being able to pay pensions, or is it going up and down? I know I'm new to this. I just want to understand what happens when that takes place.
Yeah, there'll be day-to-day fluctuations in the Strathclyde Pension Fund investments. Some of the assets will be more stable, like property values, but bond and equity share prices will fluctuate daily, Councillor. So yes, what you'll find is every year when you come to this part of the accounts, there's quite often a significant movement in pension liabilities, either up or down, based on market performance in that year. So it's a very regular occurrence to see quite a significant movement in that liability, yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask if you could explain a little bit more about the GMP indexation?
Again, that
Your chair. Sorry, Pat, on you go.
I was just going to say we've tried to explain that in the report on page 28. We could go into a lot of detail. This is basically, it's an attempt, as we say, to smooth the transition to the single tier state pension between males and females. This is an adjustment that has been, Joe again might want to say a bit more on this in terms of the specific impact at East Ayrshire, but this adjustment is a regular adjustment, this indexation that happens at every council, and it's been going on now for several years. Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I suppose through you, Chair, not very much other than the fact that you'll see on page 28, just as Pat has said, some of the issues that are affecting pension schemes and evaluations of those schemes. In years gone past, there was very little movement. You tended to get the information from the Strathclyde actuary, and were able to put the report in. Nowadays, because of Goodwin, because of McLeod, and because of GMP, you're seeing a whole series of adjustments taking place as matters progress initially through courts and findings were determined. And now you're seeing those, as Pat says, those determinations by senior courts now feeding its way through into the assumptions that actuaries made. And you're seeing, and because of that, we have a whole page at page 20 that's trying to provide some background and some detail around some of those major issues.
Sorry, I suppose it was just more of the context and the background to that point, but because it is quite well explained, but I can maybe pick that up offline. Thanks.
So I've got Councillor Maben and Councillor Richardson.
Morning, thank you. Page 24, significant risks. I'm a bit confused with this, the third one down, a 2.6 million provision set aside to offset future contributions. And then the Deloitte challenging conclusions is saying this does not represent a liability for the council, and it's a top slice from the council's annual Scottish Government settlement. And then it's been reversed. So
yeah.
Do you explain what that's about, how that's happening? Are we setting aside 2.6 million and we really don't need to for some reason?
Do you want me to answer that first, Joe, and then maybe you can come in if you want to?
That'd be helpful, Pat.
Yeah. part of the role of auditors is to challenge management judgments and estimates, and that includes provisions in the accounts. So we actively have to challenge that as part of the annual audit process. So this was a provision that we felt wasn't appropriate to be included in the council's financial statements, as we felt in discussion with Audit Scotland that this was a liability that would be met by central government and by the Scottish government, and it wouldn't be a liability that would be borne by individual councils. So we had a bit of a discussion with Joe and his financial team. Initially, Joe and his team took a different view, but we came to a conclusion that provision should be reversed, and I think that ultimately Joe was happy with that decision. I don't know if you want to add anything further to that, Joe.
Through you, Chair. So the background to this is quite interesting. So the Scottish Government has a redress scheme in respect of historic child abuse. It's a scheme that has a quantum of £400 million, which the Scottish Government believe at this point in time will be sufficient to meet those claims that come in through the redress scheme. The funding of that £400,000 is £300 million from the Scottish Government and £100 million to come from local government over a phased period. Our share of that £100 million is 2.6%. The way that the local government or councils will pay towards that £100 million is that there will not be a formal transaction from the council to the Scottish Government. Instead, over a number of years, the Scottish Government will take £2.6 million out of our grant we get each year, our RSG, if you've been to the training. So that's the process. What applies here is accounting standard IAS 37 in terms of provisions, contingent liabilities and contingent assets. And that's an interesting standard. It's one that Pat and I know well over the last 6 years. And it essentially asks 3 questions. And the first question is there a current obligation arising from a past event? And in this case, initially we believed that there was a notification through cause leaders and through Scottish Government that there would be a redress scheme, and that redress scheme would require £100 million to arise from local government. The second point, if you can meet the first point, is can you put a financial value on that provision? And we can. It's £100 million or £2.6 million for East Ayrshire Council. And the third point is, will there be a transfer of economic benefit? In other words, will cash change hands? Now, that's the bit that's a bit loose. The standard, I believe, allows this, but what we got to was we set aside £2.6 million, getting back to the point that Pat made throughout the report over the last 6 years, that this council has sound financial management. So we recognise that this council will need to pay £2.6 million towards these claims. So we set aside over a period of time that £2.6 million. We've agreed with Pat that on this occasion we will remove it as a provision, and it will fall to become an earmarked balance instead. So what happens is that the provision, in a formal provision in accounting terms, rests on the balance sheet. It sits beside creditors as though the cash is being spent or about to be spent. And you'll see a line in the balance sheet called provisions. Instead, we'll remove it from provisions and we'll add it into the general fund as an earmarked balance. We won't use it for anything. We won't use it at this point in time for anything else. And it's something that colleagues and I are looking at and working at to see what is the best. Now that we've made that adjustment, what's the best course of action for that £2.6 million? Should part of it go into the general fund, or should we put some by in advance of that deduction taking place? So the deduction in terms of our share of that £2.6 million has taken place this year. It will take place in December when we get our next settlement, as the Scottish Government seek to recover that £100 million from local government. So that's what it is. As a technical accounting point, we've had a good robust discussion over the last number of weeks with Pat and his team on this one, and I'm happy on this occasion to remove it from provisions and place it into the earmark balance.
That okay, Peter? Yep. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Joe, sorry to be pedantic about the Strathclyde Pension Fund. It's just because pensions are becoming of interest to me because of one of the committees as a councillor that I sit on out with of East Ayrshire Council. So I'm learning as I go with pensions, Joe. But obviously, I know that the Strathclyde Pension Fund relates back to the days of Strathclyde region, and I can understand why Glasgow City Council administer it, because they've probably got the bulk of the members in the fund. But I was just going to ask yourself, how often do East Ayrshire get reports probably coming down from Glasgow City Council from, you know, the actuaries, like giving you the information as to how the pension fund's performing, what the, you know, what the outlook is? Is it basically performing at a level where our pensioners or future pensioners are going to, you know, receive their full benefits, etc.? How often do you get that type of detailed info from actuaries?
And through you, Chair, so there's a number of steps in that process. As part of these accounts, we request the relevant information that Pat and the team need in order that we can complete the annual accounts and put in all the pension information. That's quite detailed. And there's Colin and Julie have a really good working relationship with both Strathclyde Pension Fund and with Hymans, who are the Strathclyde actuaries. And so in that process, we get that once a year. And we speak to the actuaries all through the audit as well. At the same time, Strathclyde Pension Fund carries out a triennial review of their assets and their liabilities to see whether or not the contributions that the 12 administering councils, the 12 former councils in Strathclyde need to make in terms of sustaining the fund. And, you know, and we look with interest at that triennial review of the value of the fund. And finally, there's meetings that I attend along with my fellow Section 85 officers in Strathclyde, where we meet our colleague in Glasgow City Council who administers Strathclyde Pension Fund, and we get more detailed analysis around the contribution that we would need to make each year and the like, and that's been remained, because of the good work of the scheme, that's been held stable for a few years. And I suppose more recently, if you were a pensioner in Strathclyde, I understand you will have received those who are pensioners and receiving a Strathclyde pension, I think in the last month received notification from the pension fund, individual letters to reassure them that as there was some volatility a few Wednesdays ago, that the fund is stable. In fact, the notification lets them know that it's been quite a good year for Strathclyde Pension Fund. I think because of some of those some of those non-investments in some of the other property stuff, and that conversion from dollar to sterling has been a real gain this year in terms of the increased value of the dollar and the reducing value of the pound. So I think that's we have those sort of connections, and we meet with them regularly.
Well, thanks for that information, Joe. That's great.
David, were you wanting to come in?
I was just to see if I could assist. I'm not sure a lawyer following two accounts can add much, but it was really just to try and give members a feel in terms of the redress scheme. That is a beast of its own that Scottish Government has rightly created to try and provide a faster track route to compensation for the victims of historic child abuse. When the scheme was first being developed, the thinking was that claimants, people who've suffered abuse in care, could maybe get a fast track claim through the scheme, but be free to pursue if they felt they were entitled to a higher level of damages due to the experience they'd suffered. Then they might also have had the option to pursue a normal claim through the courts. In terms of the redress scheme, everything Joe says is absolutely correct, as always, in terms of how that operates and how councils are to contribute to that. So councils aren't contributing to the claims against them or their predecessors. We're simply contributing on a pro rata basis to the funding of the overall redress scheme. Once the scheme is brought in, claimants now have a choice to make. They can either claim the redress scheme, and if they are successful, they'll get an award up to a maximum of 100,000. But if they accept that award, they have to sign a waiver that they can't then pursue a normal damages claim through the courts for any additional damages. So it's now a choice of one route or the other. Everything Joe said, and it's just to highlight the difference, everything Joe said in terms of there's an annual exercise that Joe and I go through internally that feeds in to Joe and Pat's engagement every year, which is that review of contingent gains and liabilities. And basically what's happened here is that original contribution has been treated in a similar fashion to the claims. But in fact, as has been identified, it's simply a question of noting that we will get 2.6 million less each year from government because they are going to top slice our contribution away, which is on that pro rata basis. The point being, just to try and keep it as simple as possible, that if a claimant doesn't go through the redress scheme and does pursue us through the courts, and there's a small number of those, then clearly they fall into the normal treatment, and Joe and I and the auditors need to be satisfied that we have set aside sufficient provision for those ordinary claims that will go through the insurance and court process if required, although hopefully not the court process with these, if there's a willingness to settle earlier in the circumstances. So it is about the account and treatment of the actual financial contribution to the redress scheme rather than about the potential liabilities themselves, and it's just a difference of treatment. The net effect is we will be contributing 2.6 as one of the 32 authorities contributing to the overall scheme, and we will also have to manage and deal with and settle along with our insurers for those claims which are brought through the normal process by way of a liability claim that can ultimately head to the courts if it's not resolved. So that's the difference in the two schemes. They kind of stand alone now rather than seg together, and what you're actually just seeing in the paper, as colleagues have explained, is a difference of view on how to treat that, and it's now been agreed it's not a provision or a liability in the normal way. It's simply, as Joe said, a deferred balance, I think we got to in terms of the treatment, because it's going to happen regardless. So it was just to give a little bit more context to the status of the scheme and how the scheme would interact with normal claims. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. Pat, I've got a couple of questions. I've got them written down. So within the audit report, Pat, there are adjustments relating to property valuations. So, and I know that these have been updated in the final annual accounts. So can you just give us a bit of background how this came about and why the adjustments were required?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is something we look at every council. And as noted, the council's got a 5-year rolling programme, so not all assets are revalued in every financial year. But what we have to look at as auditors, that we are confident that the assets not revalued in that specific year, there hasn't been a material movement in market valuation. So this year, because of probably the dramatic impact of inflation on build costs, there was that material movement on in a certain group of assets that are valued on that depreciated replacement cost because of the new build costs and inflation. So again, in discussion with Joe and his team, we did an analysis of that, and it meant an 18 million or so adjustment to the accounts. That, as I say, that's something that we need to look at specifically, and we look at that at every council that we audit, and that's really the rationale for that adjustment.
Pat, is that just an East Ayrshire thing, or is it a national?
It's a national picture, and not giving any secrets away, most of the councils that we audit have had to make an adjustment for that factor this year.
Thank you. And I've got another one. So, and it's just from last week's council, Julie presented the medium-term financial strategy. And she mentioned that over the years, auditors have commented on the council's sound financial management arrangements, which is good. But for the benefit of this committee, which 9 out of 11 are brand new councillors, can you tell us the work that you did to come to this conclusion?
Yes, a good question, Chair. The committee might be aware that I think it was 2 years ago there was a comprehensive review of the council's operations that we undertook in conjunction with Audit Scotland, called a Best Value Assurance Review report. And that looked at, even more detail than we would look at in an annual audit in terms of, was the council delivering value for money? How strong was its financial management? How strong was its governance? And the council got a very glowing report from that. It was one of the best reports in Scotland in terms of that Best Value Assurance report a few years ago. So that is the background to that. There's been a very stable finance team, very experienced finance team. Joe's head might be getting too big here to get out of the chamber at the end, but we've been very impressed with the team over the 6 years that we've audited them. And that's really the conclusion on strong financial management is really based on 6 years of experience and that best value assurance report that was done a few years ago. Hopefully that answers your question, Chair. Thank you.
It does, Pat. Thank you very much, and it's reassuring that we still have Joe. Okay. Any more questions from members, comments on this report? No? No? Okay. Pat, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll now move on to the corporate fraud team prevention. So I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here today. My name's Laura Miller. I'm the Senior Manager at North Ayrshire Council, responsible for internal audit and corporate fraud. Prior to that, I was at South Ayrshire Council, also as the Chief Auditor, but it's a pleasure to be back here on familiar ground, on familiar territory with lots of familiar faces, where I spent 10 years working in internal audit within Ailey's team. So it's lovely to be back. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me along today to speak to you about the corporate fraud team and the great partnership that we have established between North Ayrshire and East Ayrshire Councils. I think it's important, first of all, to introduce you to the team because I think it's important to get across just the experience that we have. So first of all, we have a team supervisor who unfortunately couldn't be here today. She's carrying out training just now on the CIPFA certificate in fraud risk management, and coupled with her accredited counter fraud specialist will put her in quite a unique position of having the CIPFA diploma in counter fraud management, and puts us in quite a uniquely qualified position for the team. The team supervisor is also an ex-auditor, which has got a fundamental wealth of knowledge and value of experience in understanding how we can feed investigation findings through to control improvements. Reporting to the team supervisor, we have 4 fraud investigators. 2 investigators were trained in the professionalism and security with the DWP, and internal to North Ayrshire Council, they moved within the organisation into the team from the Benefit Fraud Service. We also have another fraud investigator who has spent 25 years with Police Scotland as a qualified detective inspector with the fraud squad, and our most recent appointment to the team in September 2021 was an appointment from our community safety team, where the officer held the role of investigation officer for antisocial behaviour, so has got extensive experience of investigation techniques. So there's 4 areas I want to cover today in this presentation. First of all, a bit more information about how we came about, more about what we're doing to counter fraud within North and East Ayrshire Council, some information on how we go about that without giving away too many trade secrets, and some further developments on where it is that we're going. So in terms of who we are, the Single Fraud Investigation Service was set up as a partnership between the DWP Fraud Investigation Service, HMRC and local authorities. And as a result of that new partnership, responsibility for investigating housing benefit fraud moved from local authorities to the DWP. And through TUPE, many investigators who were previously based within local authorities moved to the DWP along with their expertise. However, in North Ayrshire Council, we retained 2 housing benefit fraud investigators, and therefore their knowledge and experience of investigating fraud. And alongside many other local authorities, a corporate fraud team was established in partnership with internal audit and generally reporting to the Chief Internal Auditor of that authority. However, North Ayrshire Council went a step further and actually moved an auditor, as I previously mentioned, into that role of supervisor. And the resource from that was taken from the existing internal audit team. So the skills and knowledge of the auditor have identified and rectified control weaknesses through their investigation work. So in October 2016, a partnership agreement was put in place with East Ayrshire Council after East Ayrshire had lost their benefit fraud investigators to the DWP. And following a number of extensions to the agreement that have been approved by East Ayrshire Council's Cabinet, the existing agreement is currently extended to the 31st of March 2025. So although the corporate fraud, the counter fraud team is based within North Ayrshire Council, we have got an equal remit and responsibility towards both authorities. In order to manage the workload, we created 2 new fraud investigator posts as well. So we're based at North Ayrshire Council headquarters at Cunningham House in Irvine and sit alongside the internal audit team within the corporate structure. And we report to the Chief Internal Auditor here at East Ayrshire Council, as well as the Head of Finance and ICT, similar to how I operate within North Ayrshire. So that was a bit about who we are, and now I'll move on to what it is we do. So we're what's known as a specialist reporting agent, which means that we are an organisation other than Police Scotland who can report cases of allegations and crime directly to the Procurator Fiscal, and the team have undertaken specialist training to enable them to do that. In compliance with the appropriate legislation, we are required to operate and investigate in exactly the same way as the police do, but the only thing we cannot do is we cannot arrest and detain individuals. So the 4 areas of prevention, detection, investigation, enforcement, I'm going to come on to in the coming slides. So the first topic there on prevention, it's an old saying, but never more true than when talking about fraud, that prevention is better than cure. There's an unquantifiable level of value in the very existence of the fraud team, a value which can never truly be known because we don't know to what extent the very existence of the team acts as a deterrent in itself. So for that reason, we have never measured the corporate fraud team on it paying for itself. There's values that are wider than the outcomes that we can measure. So what else do we have in place to try to prevent fraud? We work closely with the internal audit team to identify risks and mitigate against those weaknesses. There's good synergy between the teams, and we can also use that knowledge and awareness of what each other is doing to influence the work of either internal audit or the work of the corporate fraud team. We also can create action plans which improve weaknesses and help to maintain strong internal control arrangements. We also carry out awareness sessions with teams as well. So the team supervisor will carry out training sessions to raise awareness within teams of where the risk of fraud may lie and how to prevent this from happening. And the last point I would make is around the publicity and the public information stands. Clearly, that's an area where we're a wee bit hampered over the last couple of years with the COVID restrictions, but we're delighted that we are now getting back out and about and raising that public awareness of the team and its work. Moving on to detection, this probably covers the most significant area of work for the team. And first point to note there is referrals. So that's where people tell us. So that can come from members of the public, neighbours, family. We also need to be mindful that that can often be the most largest source of malicious referrals that are made to the team as well. But calls aren't recorded into the team, so anybody making a referral to us can remain anonymous. Members of staff can also identify anomalies in some of the work that they do, and that's where we tend to find the more valuable referrals coming in because we've usually got very good information from those sources. Regarding data matching, we can use data matching to match various data sets across the council. So, for example, a recent one was council tax records to payroll records. This is an area we're continually trying to develop, continually trying to seek new ideas, and is an area that our team liaises regularly with AILI in order to come up with new areas where we can match data and come out with anomalies that we can investigate. We'll also carry out proactive exercises. So at the moment, we're carrying out a proactive exercise on non-domestic rates and empty property relief. But again, I'm all further work that we can do. And we're also the key contact for East Ayrshire Council's participation in the National Fraud Initiative. In terms of our investigation work, there's a couple of things, a few slides on this one, because there's a few kind of quite important areas to cover on this. The team currently investigate 100% of referrals which come into the team. There may be a day that we're prevented from doing that, depending on the volume of work. It's not somewhere that we're going anytime soon. At the moment, the team supervisor already risk assesses all the referrals that we receive into the team, and a timescale is put on all of those pieces of work, depending on the priority that's assigned to it. Some referrals may also be out with our jurisdiction, but where that's the case, we will always refer that on to the most appropriate body to investigate it instead. That may be the police, it may be the DWP, it may be other local authorities or even other teams within the council. This slide covers the the areas that we will carry out investigation, the most common areas. It doesn't intend to be exhaustive if other areas were to arise, but we do cover areas such as council tax, non-domestic rates, Scottish Welfare Fund, as there are a number of risk areas within each of these headings, and we have the tools within the team to investigate any of the referrals which come our way from these sources. Just in terms of our investigation work, just important to mention a couple of points around our rights of access. There's two key areas that we have which cover this. Firstly, there's the financial regulations. So within East Ayrshire Council's financial regulations, in section 14, this ensures that internal audit and corporate fraud have access to all systems, networks, information, documents, etc. that are held within the council. It also ensures that we can obtain any explanations considered necessary in order to carry out our investigation work. The other area in terms of rights of access that's important to touch on is the Data Protection Act. It's important to note that the Data Protection Act is not there to hamper our work, but it is there to give us a legal gateway in which we can share personal information for the reasons that I've noted on that slide around prevention and detection of crime, apprehension of and prosecution of offenders, and the assessment or collection of any tax or duty. The Act also permits sharing of personal information for the purpose of and in connection with any legal proceedings. So lastly, moving on to enforcement. Obviously, in terms of refusal, it's always better to prevent or identify the fraud before any money or any service is provided. We'll always go to full recovery for any payments where there's no legitimate entitlement to that money. Obviously, in exceptional circumstances, we may not be able to do that, such as the death of the individual. In terms of any criminal prosecution, we can proceed to interview under caution with our status as a specialist reporting agent. There's no need to wait for the police or rely on their assistance, and we can report the case directly to the Procurator Fiscal once we've carried out our investigation. I've got 3 case studies I just want to share with you, which I think helps demonstrate some of what I've been saying and puts into context the background that I've just been giving. One first case that we had was an allegation of a couple who were living together but were claiming DWP and council benefits as if they were single applicants. There were a number of benefits that were being paid, including council tax reduction, DHP, single persons discount, as well as DWP income support. When an investigation commenced, this was a joint working investigation between the council and the DWP, but obviously this case did become hampered as during the pandemic, the DWP fraud investigators were actually redeployed into other areas. And as a result, we were unable to report it to the fiscal due to the elapsed time. However, we did make a significant financial recovery on this one to the tune of over £10,000. There was also around about another £1,000 of DWP benefits that were recovered as well. The second case relates to a housing abandonment. So Housing notified the corporate fraud team that it was suspected that a tenant had absconded and abandoned their council tenancy. The fraud team commenced an investigation, and by being able to trace that tenant to another non-East Ayrshire Council property, together with a new partner, evidence was obtained by the fraud team and provided to Housing, which enabled the council property to be repossessed and returned to the housing stock, making that available to let to new tenants with legitimate entitlement. But we were also able to further check any benefits and discounts that were in place at the new address and resulted in over £5,000 of further financial recoveries to be made as well. And the last case study number 3, relates to the misclaiming of a single person's discount. This was an anonymous referral that was received from a member of the public of allegations of undisclosed adults residing in the property. This was investigated by the fraud team, and it was established that there were 2 adult children living within the property as well. So single person's discount could be cancelled back to the date of the eldest child's 18th birthday and achieved a financial result of £1,700 for East Ayrshire Council. So in terms of how we're doing to date, obviously we do a combination of the reactive work as well as the proactive work. We have carried out proactive work in areas such as NDR and council tax and have made recoveries to date of £141,000. We've also received over 1,000 referrals to the team since its inception, with investigation recoveries amounting to 323,000. There are obviously the non-financial outcomes that I've just spoken about, such as recoveries of tenancies, recoveries of blue badges and the like. I just want to touch on where we're going. We are a team that prefers not to stand still. We're always looking for new areas, new ideas. As we know, fraudsters will always find new ways of trying to target us as well. So it's very important that we stay ahead of the game on that. In terms of our joint working with the DWP, that was something that was introduced just before the coronavirus pandemic and obviously was paused for a number of months there. We did have that case that was closed in September, as I mentioned, to the tune of over £10,000. And there's another 2 live joint working cases that are ongoing at the moment. We carry out proactive housing tenancy checks now. So this is where we're able to identify whether or not a tenancy should actually even be refused before it's even been given. So again, about that, trying to get that prevention in place before a service has been provided. But the corporate fraud team do have tools available to them that housing perhaps do not. And that's why we're receiving more and more referrals through this. As I mentioned, we're carrying out a proactive NDR empty property relief exercise, and we also continue to coordinate the National Fraud Initiative on behalf of East Ayrshire Council. We're always looking for wider areas of data matching, as I mentioned, but the area I just want to touch on this slide is the bullet point around the International Fraud Awareness Week. As I mentioned, we are delighted to be getting back out and about and into the public to talk about the work that we do and to raise awareness of the work that we do. So for International Fraud Awareness Week, which is the week of the 14th to the 18th of November, we will be displaying at 6 sites across East Ayrshire and North Ayrshire, so 3 for East and 3 for North. In terms of East Ayrshire, we will be at Sainsbury's Stewarton on Monday the 14th of November, and we will be at the Asda in Kilmarnock on Wednesday the 16th of November and Asda in Cumnock on Friday the 18th of November, all from 9:30 to 12:30 in the morning. So please do come along and see us. We'd be delighted to see you. Obviously happy to stop for questions. Paul, would you mind just going on to the next slide so that we can leave up the contact information should anybody be interested in taking any of that down, although it is in your papers, but I'm happy to take any questions that the committee have. Thank you very much.
Laura, thanks very much. That was a really good presentation. God, geez, I've got your work cut out for you, as you know. The work that you are doing is quite wide varied as well, isn't it? I mean, the work that you do in like the tenancy recoveries, I mean, I was astounded by the figures in that. It's really quite something. I never ever thought that that's something that you would be working on and, you know, and getting results on. So that's really, really good. So just in terms of, you know, I'm just, sorry. Just in terms of, like, you know, like your council tax and, you know, your care fees and stuff. So it's in the report somewhere, but what kind of percentage of your work is that in detecting those?
I didn't press mine either. Thank you, Chair. I think it's difficult to put a percentage of the, for example, the time spent on some of these areas. Certainly the areas of council tax are where we see the highest volume of referrals. So that's probably where we would spend the majority of our time. Equally, many of these referrals can be quite straightforward to investigate. So the actual time spent to open and close that case can actually be quite short, and but we will be able to get results on those very, very quickly. So in terms of recoveries, it probably accounts for usually the most amount is in the areas of council tax, whether that's council tax reduction, single person's discount and the likes, but perhaps doesn't quite equate to half of our time or the majority of our time.
Good for the amount of investigations that you have to do, that you can get through them quite quickly. Then is that what you're saying? Yeah, it's quite.
We do tend to, yes, because we do have the standard checks in place that we do and that we carry out. But in terms of elapsed time, investigations can take some time because obviously we do want to bring people in and we want to interview them under caution. And there's certain timescales that we need to comply with in order to do that. But yeah, so cases can remain open for some time. But in terms of some of the background checks we do, some of those are relatively quick.
Do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Cannon?
Thanks for that. Obviously, it's excellent work you do. I can't actually find it again, but did I see something about some fraud work on taxi licenses? Was there a reference to taxi licenses somewhere? I can't find it now. I'm sure it was there. Was that, am I just making things up, or is, sorry, thanks.
Thanks very much for the question.
Bit more explanation around
A
that.
bit more explanation around that. No, that's fine. It tends to be possibly the part you've picked up on is around the licensing, but it's more around the landlord side of things. So we don't tend to really, although it is an area that we could investigate, we don't tend to get an awful lot of referrals in that area. And it's not necessarily that there's fraud in that area, but it's more that fraud can perhaps be the driver for any misconduct in that area. In terms of the taxi licenses, it's an area that we could certainly look at, and I know it's an area that a number of other authorities perhaps have a slightly bigger issue with, perhaps towards more of your built up areas, towards more of your city region areas, but it's not something that we've really been hugely involved with yet, but we'd have the skills to pick that up if we did need to.
Thanks.
So I'll get Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Lennox.
Through you, Chair, I've got two questions, so I'll ask them both. So Laura, I'm just curious as how we come to £575 for each blue badge. That would be my first question. Just curious for myself. The other one is we are a shared service based on 100%. What kind of percent does East Ayrshire get out of that? What's the workload do we take in percentage? Just if you can answer that for me.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the blue badge, the £575, yes, this is a figure which is applied to the results through the National Fraud Initiative exercise. So through the National Fraud Initiative, there's data matching between the Council and the DWP. And where there's found to be an error within that area and a value is assigned to that blue badge of £575, I think, and I won't speak for Ailey on this, but I think it's acknowledged around areas like this that we don't, it's a bit of an arbitrary figure. It's a figure that's put on this by the Cabinet Office, and it really is based on really lost congestion charges, lost parking income by somebody misusing a blue badge. So for areas such as East Ayrshire Council and North Ayrshire Council, yes, we do see we see outcomes and we see results from that matching exercise, but it's important to note that that £575 is not money that would actually come back into the council. It's an estimate that the Cabinet Office place on lost revenues. And in terms of the second question around yes, you're absolutely right. It is a partnership around, investigating fraud on behalf of East Ayrshire and North Ayrshire Council. We very much operate as a team, as though we are the one team. We don't consider ourselves to be that we are a North Ayrshire corporate fraud team. We're very much a North and East Ayrshire partnership. We don't have exact figures of how we spend our time. So I couldn't, for example, tell you today that we spend 50% on East Ayrshire and 50% on North Ayrshire, but I would just reiterate that there are 100% referral investigations are carried out. So there is nothing that we would miss out on. There's no priority of one authority over another. That's not how the prioritisation of the referrals works. So it's also important, I think, to note that we do sometimes see more referrals at North Ayrshire Council than we do at East, but it's important to kind of get across that doesn't mean we spend more time on North Ayrshire work. So while I say we have more referrals, many of them are coming from the source that I first mentioned around perhaps disgruntled members of the public, for example, some malicious referrals that we receive that they really don't take very long to get to the bottom of, and we know that they can be an open and closed case very quickly. What we see at East Ayrshire Council is much more quality referrals coming through internally. And so in terms of time spent, I'm very comfortable that East Ayrshire is definitely getting the service that they are paying for.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, so Councillor Lennox and Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that presentation, which really quite informative and well done in the good work that you're doing. Might be my naivety, but I don't see the profile of your group as being high enough. Do you do social media campaigns just to raise the profile of the team and encourage people to start reporting fraudulent issues.
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. That's a really good question. Sorry, something I probably should have mentioned within the presentation. We do have quite a significant profile on social media. So we have Facebook pages, we have Twitter accounts. We regularly post and reshare significant issues that are perhaps ongoing at the time. We obviously do publicise our International Fraud Awareness Week as well. So I know that internally communications will go out within East Ayrshire Council, as well as what we put out within North Ayrshire Council as well. We also have advertising on council vehicles in the North Ayrshire area. So we do that. I think that's probably where we see a number of referrals coming into the team from within the community. So yes, we do have quite a significant profile within both the authority and the wider area that we serve.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a quick question, and I would never condone MD making a a fraudulent claim for a benefit that they're not entitled to. But things like the single person council tax discount, etc. Obviously, we've got a cost of living crisis, hitting us just now. Are you seeing a correlation in the amounts of these cases? Are they on the increase? With regards to that?
Through you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. I think that's a very good question. I don't think it's something that we're particularly seeing coming through at the moment. Having said that, and we'll come on to this at the next agenda item, we have received a significant number more referrals than what we've had, obviously, during the course of the pandemic. So I think it's something that we do need to keep a watching brief on, and it's something that we'll continue to perhaps target areas such as that as part of our proactive exercises.
Thanks for that answer. I would probably expect you to see an increase in cases. Obviously, it's the council's job to make sure that people out there who probably aren't claiming benefits that they are entitled to do claim. But obviously, on the other side of it, people shouldn't be abusing the system. So, thanks for that answer.
Anybody else have any questions? Councillor Maben?
Thank you. Just on profile, I eventually found your Facebook page on my phone. You have 120 followers, which is poor, to be honest. I'm glad to hear you saying that you're going to be visiting the supermarkets and going public, and hopefully that'll help you improve and get your profile up. Clearly there's some work to do, especially with Facebook. I don't know how you're doing with Twitter. On the Appendix 1, page 76, about the referrals, that number was drifting down the way, gone.
Sorry, that's the next report. That's
the next report.
That's the following report. Yeah. Okay. Or you can come back in
I'll pull my guns. I'll keep it.
Overexcited, enthusiastic. That's fine. I'm pleased to see, Laura, that we're getting back out there for it, raising the profile through the International Fraud Awareness Week from the 14th to 18th of November. I'm really pleased that Sainsbury's and Asda are hosting that across East Ayrshire. So that's Stewart and Kilmarnock and Cumnock. So that's really, really good. This council and North Ayrshire Council we're committed to, and it's our duty to protect the public purse. And it's not just about, the defrauding of the council. What that is for me is any money, every pound that's defrauded from this council is taking out vital services that's for our communities. And we always have to stand and really do everything we can to prevent it. And as you said in your presentation, prevention is key. And, I'm perfectly comfortable with the arrangements that this council has and the control that's put in place to ensure that prevention is there, and it's absolutely top of the agenda and it's a priority. So well done. I think it's really, really good work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 4, and we'll say hello to Zach O'Neill, but we'll hand over to Ailey.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, members. Good morning. The report at this item 5 covers a lot of the ground that Laura covered, so I'm not going to duplicate that. But this is the standard report that I bring up to committee at mid-year, just to tell you about the work of the corporate fraud team in the first 6 months of the year. So corporate fraud team has been going since January 17. The profile of the team is interesting and absolutely one that's always on our radars. Certainly in terms of International Fraud Awareness Week, that's something that we've done every single year, apart from during the pandemic, when we really couldn't go out and about in quite the same way. But the team are absolutely open to going to other events. So with the previous administration, members would ask the team to come along to events in the community, and Laura and the team are absolutely happy to come and do that. So now we're back into a wee bit more normality, where the team are out and about. We can start doing that again. So please let us know if you would like the team to come out and speak to any groups that you're involved with in the community. But we'll absolutely always look at that wider profile again. In fact, the supermarket events were only confirmed early this morning, and I've already spoken to our PR team in the council. So publicity will be going out into the community about those events. And we also have a feature in Eddie's blog next Friday, because as you probably know, the Chief Exec's blog is the highest read document in the council. So that's the document we would go to promote it within the council. There's also a web page on the council's website promoting the anti-fraud work. And as Laura said, you know, we've got Facebook and Twitter. Absolutely take the points you've been making. What our PR team in the council do is they usually repost items that are on either Facebook or Twitter within the council's social media promotion as well. The corporate fraud team was affected by the pandemic. We saw the referrals going down significantly, and the team were subject to restrictions in terms of what they were allowed to go out and do in the community. So we're back to, I think, as good a position as we were before the pandemic. And you'll see in the report, the referrals are actually back up to, they're actually beyond the levels pre-pandemic. So members, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to repeat the background or the progress that Laura's mentioned, but I'll just cover a few other items in the report. I suppose by way of context as well, it's important to say, we three chief auditors in Ayrshire work really closely together. It's particularly helpful now that the other two chiefs came out of the team in East Ayrshire. So we have friendships as well as professional working relationships. So we all get on incredibly well. You'll realise that South Ayrshire is not in the shared corporate fraud team, but we work very closely with South Ayrshire. And I think I'm right in saying, Laura, the door's always open for South to join. It has been suggested a couple of times that, you know, they look at joining that share there. At the moment, they prefer to have their own in-house team in South. And but we share intelligence, we share information, and that works well. We all know each other very, very well, and you know, there's no hesitation at email and picking up the phone. And in fact, we meet on a regular basis as the three Pan-Ayrshire chief auditors. So I thought I would just touch on that as well. As Lillian said, the work that we do with the corporate fraud team, the work we do in internal audit is very much about protecting the public purse. It's about making sure that funds and benefits are going to the right people, and that is very important to us personally and as a council. At paragraph 3, you'll see that I've stated the losses due to fraud and error that Audit Scotland have stated in their recent report. So since 2006-07, 2.4 billion of fraud and error has been identified across the UK public sector, including 158.5 million in Scotland. Now, that does include some estimates, which will include the 575 quid for each blue badge that they identify through the NFI. But so we can challenge that figure to an extent. At the end of the day, it's still a big figure. There's going to be a big figure there, however it's adjusted. So it is an area that's an area of risk for all of us in the public sector. If I move down to paragraphs 9 and following, this is a standard aspect in the report and lays out the roles and responsibilities for the prevention and detection and fraud. we've all got complementary roles here. There are specific responsibilities for internal audit and for the fraud investigators within the corporate fraud team, but just want to reinforce the complementary nature of our work and the constant communication that there is between the teams to achieve the best results for East Ayrshire. The corporate fraud team role in paragraphs 12 to 14, Laura has spoken to you about that. The scope of the corporate fraud team was agreed at Cabinet back in 2006 when the partnership was established. And that's something, you know, that's constantly under review. I think it still works well for us, and I think it is targeting the areas of risk. So although that's the scope, the work will be very much targeted in what we think at any point in time are the higher areas of risk. So for example, taxi licensing was mentioned. We work very closely with all our colleagues in the council, with David Mitchell and his teams. Taxi licensing through the NFI tends not to give us any reason to believe that there's a high level of risk in there. And as Laura said, it's more about links into other areas, perhaps within the wider crime within our community. So there's very much that risk assessment that's done on a regular basis of where the team should be focusing their work. So the achievements today, if we move on to paragraph 18, Appendix 1, which Laura has prepared in the usual way to attach to the cover report from me, shows that what we refer to as the reactive work, dealing with referrals, those referrals have, following the slump during the pandemic, are now up at above pre-pandemic levels. Now, we don't have a scientific explanation of that. It possibly is related to cost of living, as Councillor Richardson mentioned earlier. It tends to be when there's pressures on people that they're maybe more mindful of where they think other people are maybe not doing the right things, and maybe more likely to take an increased interest in protecting that public purse. So, you know, we're monitoring that position. The COVID, as I said earlier, also had an impact on the team's ability to go out and about, but that's now been reinstated. And Appendix 1 gives us some highlights, and Laura's presentation gave us some highlights of the current collaboration between the corporate fraud team and services within the council. And primarily that work is with Joe's finance team, revenues and benefits team, and Blair Miller's housing team. And we get very good feedback from those services in terms of the added value from the corporate fraud team. So recently the corporate fraud team have stopped some housing applications which were found to be based on fraudulent information. And with Joe's team, working with Joe's colleagues in revenue and benefits, the corporate fraud team are currently out looking at properties to see if they fall into the right eligibility for any empty property relief or related benefits. So that, again, it's social media is useful, having the boots out in the ground in the community is useful because the word gets around. And we've had some very good results from that work. Paragraph 19 lays out the wider benefits, which Laura touched on, of the shared corporate fraud team, not least of which is it takes the pressure off my team. And the corporate fraud team are the experts in fraud investigation. Auditors are not expected to be experts in fraud investigation. So we have that absolute relevant expertise that's helping us look at the fraud area. That paragraph also states that there's no prerequisite for the team to be self-financing, and that's been a really important thing for us. And I think we need to always be minded to be careful what we wish for from the corporate fraud team. If the corporate fraud team starts to give us really high recovery levels, there's something wrong with our controls. And I'll give you an example. In Appendix 2, it refers to a data matching exercise that the corporate fraud team carried out for us a few years ago, which was data matching payroll data to our council tax debt database. Another council did it not long before it was carried out for this council. The other council found that the debt, staff debt, council tax debt, which wasn't subject to a recovery arrangement, was in the order of £200,000. So the exercise was carried out in this council shortly thereafter. So payroll data matched to council tax data. There was not one employee in this council who had not been picked up by Joe's service and was subject to a repayment order. So that for me is fantastic. We didn't get a financial recovery, but we got assurance. And that's really, for me, the great value of the corporate fraud team. There will be recoveries. We'll never get to that position. Something's wrong if they weren't making a level of recovery, but we don't want the recoveries way up at the hundreds and hundreds of thousands that other councils are reporting, because there's something fundamentally wrong with your controls if that's the case. The National Fraud Initiative, we're providing an update from paragraph 20 onwards for you. The 2021 exercise has just recently concluded. The NFI is carried out every 2 years, led by the Cabinet Office, and in Scotland there's 132 public bodies contribute data to that process, but it is a UK-wide process that's carried out. It is every 2 years, but it feels as if it never stops, because we've just concluded, we've just got the outcomes from the 2021 exercise, but we're already in the next exercise, the 22-23 exercise, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So paragraph 23 and 24 is providing, I think, a high level of assurance to members about the outcome of the NFI, because apart from a number of blue badges, which was higher than usual, and which I think we can clearly attribute to the COVID deaths during that period, unfortunately, a number of blue badges were found to be still with the families of dead people, and that is found every NFI exercise that's run, because as a council, we don't go champing the doors of dead people to get your blue badges back immediately. So there's always a group where the badges are still with the family. I don't believe families are minded to go out and immediately use that blue badge to park in places. There's no evidence of that. There's been no referrals to our corporate fraud team for these 40 badges, and our parking attendants have not found one misuse of those 40 blue badges. The 575 that Councillor Stewart mentioned earlier, yes, it's an absolute nonsense for this council, but it's the value that's set by the Cabinet Office. So it doesn't matter where your council is. If it's in London, if it's in East Ayrshire, that's the value they attach to a blue badge that's found to still be with a dead person. It's £575. So I always say to committee, that's the value that's included in the national report. It's included in a big figure in the national report. We're no cited specifically. It doesn't disaggregate over councils, but I'm telling you what we know to be in that big report, and it's 23,000 for us, is apparently what the NFI has found in terms of fraud value for us. It's nonsense. But overall, as stated at paragraph 24, the NFI has been very useful again in giving us a good level of assurance, because you can see the number of participating services. So we've got a number of Joe's services, we've got council tax, we've got creditors, we've also got housing, we've got payroll, we've got David's taxi licence service. They all participate and they all put data into the pot. North Ayrshire Council oversee the exercise for us, but the matches come back for our services to investigate. So the officers in those services then investigate the matches. It's overseen at the moment at that level of detail by Paul Davis, our audit manager, and that's a very thorough exercise that's carried out within this council. And year on year on year, it's given us assurance that our controls are working, and that for me is the really valuable aspect of the NFI, which brings me on to paragraphs 25 and 26. So we're now starting the 22-23 NFI exercise. The data sets have already been submitted to the Cabinet Office. They'll press whatever buttons they press, and they'll give us reports in due course that we'll investigate the matches again. That's the royal we, it'll be the services that'll be investigating those matches. But what I'm suggesting that we do slightly differently this time at paragraph 26, there's a self-assessment document that Audit Scotland give us every year to complete, and then we give that to our external audit team, who this year will be Audit Scotland, and they take that as part of their assurance that we've bought into the NFI. Now, there's a bit of that self-assurance is for those charged with governance, which is this committee. and normally we fill it in for you and you never see it. So I wanted a wee bit more transparency. It was difficult to find any improvements in the way we do this because I think we do it quite well, but I think the bit we haven't done as well is sharing that early doors with this committee. So I wanted to share that self-assessment with you at this point in time, and I'm proposing that committee agree a formal recommendation to express your support for the continued engagement with the NFI process, which I know we've got your support, but there's an expectation in that self-assessment that we formally record that, and I think that's a good thing to do. So. There was nothing else, Chair, that I wanted to mention on that report, particularly after the very comprehensive presentation from Laura. So I'll stop now so that we've got plenty of time for any questions. Thanks.
Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. No, it was just a quick question about it's just page 72. I think it's point 11, and this is switching away from external fraud maybe to internal fraud. I was just going to ask the question where it says there, you know, internal audit continues to investigate irregularities involving employees. How comfortable as a council are we that, see I'm a junior member of staff in the invoice department, and I think one of my managers is maybe doing something they shouldn't be doing. Let's call it whistleblowing or whatever. How comfortable are we as a council that every member of staff in East Ayrshire would be comfortable bringing a referral like that to you guys?
Through you, Chair, I can only base my response on my experience and backed up with the fact I think we've got good policies in place, but they come to me, they find me out. It's really important to me that I'm physically here at work on a regular basis because people come to me and tell me about things they might be feeling because they don't want to email me sometimes, they don't want to phone me. So people come and find us out. I don't know if everybody will feel comfortable, but certainly they find us and we do get reports. We don't have a high level. We do have, I think, a good set of policies that those arrangements are in place, and whistleblowing policy should be reinforced by each service to their employees, and that arrangement is in place. We have prosecuted a number of employees over the years, and in some cases those referrals have been made to us by reasonably junior members of staff. But we get referrals in from all over. It's not just from whistleblowing, we widen the net there. So we would take referrals not just from staff, but we'll take referrals from contractors, of which I've got a couple sitting on my desk. There's nothing in them. They're disgruntled. And that happens, but you've got to look at everything. You've got to look at everything. So, and we get what Audit Scotland call the armchair auditors, who are the community. And they're a really important part of our sort of knowledge. So if they're reporting anything they think that's not happening well. So I'd like to think that people feel that they have freedom and without any disadvantage to themselves, because I think that's probably where you're coming from, and that reluctance maybe to come forward. We may have it in some areas, but the policies are there, they're promoted, and people do come to us. So that's my experience, and that's I think the best way for me to answer that.
Yeah, no, thanks for that answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
David and Councillor Maybe.
Yeah, sorry again not to go over the same ground, but just to support what Ailey said, that the way the question was presented in terms of how comfortable folk might be involves a different kind of level of assessment, but just to reinforce, and it's not just a question of having bits of paper in drawers or in PCs somewhere, it is about having effective policies in place. And there's a few aspects to that. One is having the policy, and we do have a clear whistleblowing policy that directs management as to how they respond, which is the second point, and staff as to what to do if they've got concerns, which is the kind of third point of the triangle. So as an employer and as an organisation, the way to instill confidence as people is how we are seen to respond to the complaints we do get, to make sure that where it's brought under whistleblowing, we can observe confidentiality as far as possible, and that if issues are identified, they are addressed and seen to be addressed, kind of heads and sticks approach. The more confidence people have in our overall arrangements and approach, then the more it's reasonable to expect they would feel, to answer the question, comfortable in coming forward. Are we happy they have access to the knowledge and information they need? Yep. Are we happy that management know what an effective response should be to a whistleblowing complaint? Yep. And are we happy, are we offering assurance here that, as Ailey said, the manner in which we deal with the ones that are made and have been made, which is many over the years, is appropriate and should reinforce that confidence? Then yeah, because that's what we set out to do when we deal with these. It's not just deal with them, but be seen to deal with them. And I don't mean public executions, but be seen to deal with them in an appropriate manner, because that's the way in which you instill that confidence in the workforce, that if they raise something, it won't just be dealt with, but it'll be dealt with in an appropriate manner. And that's the kind of element that we bring to this in terms of how we respond and how we encourage services to respond when matters are raised. I think the final caveat is obviously we answer the questions and we get involved in these discussions on the points as they're raised, but I wouldn't want to suggest that the focus in this, that this is a massive area or that there are large numbers, and that would suggest there's more fundamental issues within the organisation. But the fact of the matter is, any organisation with a £350 million kind of overall budget with 6,000 staff, and that runs the range and provides a range of services and activities that we all undertake, then there is going to always be the potential for people to be doing things they shouldn't. You can't eradicate that, but what you can do is minimise the opportunity and also maximise the response where people think they've found a way around it. And that's what we've always tried to do as the pillars of governance, if you like, along with, as Ailey said, Joe in the finance service, Ailey, myself and Joe and Craig MacArthur before Joe, work as effectively as we can and meet on a basis, not for a wee while due to COVID, but meet regularly to review matters, along as well with the head of HR, because there's overlap there. So I think the short answer, not being facetious, is we are satisfied that everything's in place that needs to be in place, and there would be a reasonable expectation that staff would also have that knowledge and awareness and know what to do and where to go if they had concerns within their own service or indeed in another service. And we're not aware of any incidents that have been found at a later date where people have indicated they were reluctant to raise matters at an earlier date. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but we've never identified an instance where folk have expressed their reluctance to come forward. Hope that helps and supplements Ailey's response.
Thanks, David. Peter, you want to come in?
Okay, back to Appendix 1, where I was jumping the gun earlier. It's the bar chart with the number of referrals, which was driven down due to COVID and is now going up the way. The most recent one, 176. Do we know if that's still going to go up the way and increase even further? I'm also thinking that you're a small team, you have a manager and 4 investigators, probably on a fairly tight budget. If the number of referrals keeps increasing, are you going to need more investigators and a bigger budget to investigate more caseload, more work?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Obviously, it's hard to say whether or not that will continue to increase at this current rate. If I was to have a crystal ball, I would assume not. That is the highest rate that we have seen even prior to COVID, and I think is possibly driven by obviously the other question around the cost of living crisis. I would also note as well that we are receiving a lot more referrals in terms of the non-financial outcomes round about the middle of the following page, where we had 25 tenancy recoveries made in conjunction with East Ayrshire Housing Service. So while that's 25 recoveries, that may have been more referrals than that. So we're starting to see a lot more internal referrals coming through in areas such as that. While I would hope to see it remain at that level, I wouldn't suspect it would increase, but fingers crossed we're getting enough communication out there that we will continue to see that at least staying at a relatively high level.
Sorry, Chair, can I just pick up on the prioritisation? You're absolutely right, Councillor Mabin. At some point, supply and demand might not quite line up, and we've always been aware of that. And Laura alluded to that in our presentation, that prioritisation is more likely to come in, rather than, we need to be conscious of the resources that we have as a council, and the best use of that resources. The team are managing at the moment to get through all the referrals by effectively triaging them. They're prioritising them as they come in. Some of the referrals are not very good quality and can be dismissed fairly quickly. Other referrals are give more substance to proceed upon. We have discussed the fact that at some point we may need to agree that not all of the referrals get the level of investigation they get at the moment, and that is just something we'll need to agree with at the time. It obviously will depend on the nature of that at any point in time. I can divert some resource from my internal audit team at any point, and then we can always have a chat with the Section 95 officer, can't we? But we are very conscious of the fact that, we've got a level of resource that we work around, and we're aiming to have the best outcomes. In the 6 years that the team has been up and running, that hasn't been an issue, but obviously it will depend on how that bar graph starts to move. And we report back to committee every 6 months, so you will see the movement in that graph on a regular basis. So time will tell, I think, and we know we've got the tools to deal with that situation, and we'll deal with it if it comes along.
Laura, you want to come back in?
Thanks, Chair. Can I just come back in just very briefly, just on what Ailey was talking about there, which is around that prioritisation of that work. We, as we said, we investigate 100%. We not only investigate 100%, but we also allow time for proactive exercises as well. And we'd obviously want to continue that too, because the proactive exercises can give us far greater results as well. What we just need to be mindful of. So basically, I think what I'm saying is you've hit on a really good topic of conversation here, and it's one that we will have to pick up on in the future if this continues to happen, because there is that cost benefit of additional resource versus, yes, we may assess some referrals as low risk, but what if there is something in one of those that we do actually find that there is something significant there, particularly if that's come from a member of the public, particularly if we don't investigate it, are we then creating a potential reputational damage there as well? So I think it's a really important question, one I think for further conversation down the line when we reach that position.
That's a good point you made there about reputational damage. Yep, definitely.
Yeah, it was following from that you're going public now and you're going to supermarkets, and you're possibly going to get more referrals, and if you're improving your social media output as well, I would think your referral numbers are going to go up.
We have been out and about every year. The only years we haven't been out and about are the COVID years. So that hasn't, whether it's led to, we can't actually link that directly to any immediate increase in referrals, but it's just to keep that awareness out there in the community. So every single year that's shown in the bar graph, apart from the COVID years, the team have been out and about, and the social media presence has always been pretty high. But if you speak to, certainly I know the referrals we get within the council tend to be people will seek out. It's not because they know about the corporate fraud team. If they realise something is happening that they don't think should be happening, they'll seek out how to refer it. So I think it's a combination of the two. There's that awareness of the team, and then there's a seeking out how to report something you think's no right. So it's that two-way track, I think. So it'll be interesting to see if we get many more. I tend to agree with Laura. I think we've maybe peaked at the moment, because I think there's also the accumulation of stuff that people have been sitting on during COVID, when people were perhaps less likely to make referrals in to the corporate fraud team during that period of time. We'll see.
Councillor Canning.
I think there's the flip side as well. I think the more you're out there, when we're trying to prevent fraud, we don't want to catch it, we want to prevent it in the first place. And the more visibility you've got, hopefully people will think twice, because I think there's a higher chance of getting caught. So then that's the flip side. Hopefully that'll be this outcome rather than.
Yeah. So you, Chair, it comes back to the the phrase that the Chair and I both used today is about protecting the public purse. And that is absolutely the priority, and that's a lot of the work that happens through the internal audit team. And it comes back to being careful what we wish for from the corporate fraud team. And if the corporate fraud team has primarily given us assurance that for me is the best combination. Yeah.
Peckham?
I just made the point there, I suppose if we're trying to prevent anything, often it's education. You know, I think I made the point maybe in that if you've got the resources to go into the secondary schools, because then you might be getting people, and if they know about it early on, again, you're hopefully preventing it from an education perspective, but also from stopping people to before they think about it.
It's a good point. Just in back everything. So advertising the team and the work that they do and stamping out fraud is a priority. I mean, we've also made public what's happened to people who have been caught, and that's been published on our websites and in the local media. I think it was the Cumnock Chronicle.
Yeah.
I think that was a large case, Elliot. I can't remember the details.
Cumnock Chronicle and Kilmarnock Standard have picked up reports that we've made through this committee over the years, and that part of the problem with that sort of deterrent factor of reporting what's happened to people is it can be quite a long journey from identifying the fraud to the prosecution. And we've had sometimes in previous years between those events, which doesn't allow for particularly immediate reporting. But certainly we aim to put out there the sort of, I'm reluctant to use name and shame, but that tends to be quite a well-used phrase. So yeah, but absolutely prevention better than cure.
Councillor Watts?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Ailey and the fraud team for the hard work that they are doing and continue to do. And I think it's important to highlight the Deloitte report at section 27 in the report that states that they believe we have a robust internal audit function, as well as having appropriate arrangements for the prevention and detection of fraud and error. And I think that really is, you know, Ailey and the team's hard work that's got us to that. I just really think that's important to highlight that, Chair.
Always agree with you. See, can I just ask, in terms of the number of blue badges that we have as a council? So just to give a bit of context around that, so it was 6 the year before and it's 40 this year, but just in the context of how many we actually have in East Ayrshire.
At any point in time, there's about 3,000 blue badges out there in the community, so it's about 1%.
Thank you very much. Is that roughly about the same in North Ayrshire, Laura? Sorry to put you in the spot.
No problem, Chair, thanks. We've got a similar number of blue badges in terms of the number, which is still due to go to our audit committee next week. The NFI identified about double the number of data matches in that area. So around about 50,000 of outcomes from that.
Councillor Richardson.
See, on the subject of blue badges, I mean, see when a family suffered a bereavement of, say, a father or a mother, there's a lot to be done, and probably returning the blue badge to the council is probably something that family can slip under the radar. But obviously we've got the see within the council, and I wouldn't say we would be issuing any letters, you know, I would probably leave any letter to maybe like a year later or something like that. But we've got obviously the register of you know, births, deaths, marriages, etc. And we know who's got the blue badge. So is there any correlation? Do we look at that and maybe 12 months after a person has passed away, do we maybe send a nice courteous letter to say, we notice there's still a blue badge on issue. We know that at this time, you know, there's a lot to be done, and, you know, we're sad for your loss, etc., etc. But is it possible you could return the blue badge to the council? Do we do that?
No, we don't at the moment. But we are discussing that with the Director of Health and Social Care at the moment, just to see if there's any changes we can make in that process. But I think it's important to remember the last time with NFI, there were 6 badges identified as still being with the families of dead residents. And this time 40, and the 40 I think is absolutely attributable to COVID. The 6 can be because of timing. Because the data sets are run on a specific day's data, and you might just miss that blue badge being handed back when the death's been registered. And so there might be a wee timing issue there, but there is a very good system in the council, but it's limited to the council boundaries. So if you're resident in East Ayrshire, you don't need to register your death in East Ayrshire. Your death can be registered out with this area. So if you die outside this area, you can register it in the local. And we think, what we understand from speaking nationally to colleagues is that, and this has happened in other councils and might be the reason in North Ayrshire as well, that a number of people during COVID didn't die at home. They may have died in a hospital out with the boundaries of East Ayrshire. So we've got a tell us once process where our registrars will tell Health and Social Care about the deaths. So they'll know who's got a blue badge, and then that's marked, and the parking attendants will be aware of that as well. So they're looking out for these blue badges. So I think that tends to work quite well, but we've just had such an unusual 2 years, and that is absolutely impacted on the outcomes of the NFI. But you're right, maybe there's some tweaks that we can make to the process, so we're not ignoring that at the moment, and we are having discussions with Craig around any continuous improvements.
It's just my hunch that the blue badge thing, the word fraud there, in most cases, I would suggest it's no fraud. It's just the fact that, sons and daughters are having to look after the estate of their mum and dad, and during the bereavement, etc., etc. I could see how the blue badge issue might.
Yeah, unfortunately, the NFI don't distinguish between fraud and error, as they call it. So they identify every blue badge. And so what my view is, I don't think these blue badges are being used fraudulently, and certainly not wholesale.
And I'm happy to hear that the parking attendants are finding that blue badges are being used when they shouldn't be used. No, that's fine.
Okay, members, can we agree the recommendations, particularly point 5? Where we're being asked to confirm support for continued engagement in the NFI process. Okay.
I wish to abstain.
Wish to abstain. Okay, thank you very much. We'll get that noted.
No, sorry. In terms of abstention, the standing orders provide that if any member if a motion's moved and seconded, and any member wants to move an amendment and fails to get a seconder, they can ask for their dissent to be recorded. But if you haven't actually moved an alternative, or if you move an alternative and get a seconder, it would go to the vote. But you can only abstain when there is a vote, and at the moment we only have the motion and secondment to accept the recommendations. So in terms of standing orders, for a member to abstain, they would have to have moved an alternative, failed to get a seconder, and asked for their dissent to be recorded. You can't abstain for a vote unless there's a vote. Sorry.
Thank you, David. Councillor Clark.
So can I vote no? And we're being forced to agree.
No, you're not. What you've been asked to do is to move the negative, if that's what you wish to do, not to extend it. And if you get a seconder, it would go to the vote. If you don't get a seconder, you can ask to have your dissent recorded, Councillor Clark. You're not being obliged to accept the recommendations, but you have to adhere to standing orders, which don't just allow members to abstain, particularly when there's no vote. So again, you simply need to move the alternative and ascertain if you've got a seconder. If you have a seconder, we go to the vote. If you don't have a seconder, you can have your dissent recorded.
Seems the easiest option.
Sorry, it's not about convenience or the easy option. If you don't wish to support the recommendations, then you are entitled to move an alternative, and then it's up to your fellow colleagues in the committee whether there's any support for that.
Can I just point out the recommendations are for noting, Councillor Clark, they're for noting. If you read the recommendations, they are for noting. Do you wish not to note the recommendations is what I'm asking you. So you don't wish to, right?
So actually, I don't know if there was any
Okay.
response. I didn't catch that. I think we're at an impasse at the moment. We have a councillor who wishes to abstain, as you say, from recommendations to note, and I've explained as best I can what requires to happen for any councillor not wishing to support any recommendations in terms of either moving the alternative. And as I've said, if they get a seconder, we have a vote. And if there's no seconder, Councillor Clark could have her dissent recorded. But like you, I think we would need clarity what Councillor Clark wishes to move with or without a seconder, given that the recommendation is simply to note. So I'm afraid we'll need to seek clarification for Councillor Clark.
I don't think council wants to hear my thoughts on this, to be honest. I think, show of hands, how many people have raised a family on benefits? Anyone? If you had, maybe we'd be less gleeful about prosecuting and getting money back. Try it for a year and you'll see how hard it is. A bit more empathy and understanding would go a long way. And let's talk about if someone is owed money by the council or by the DWP, how long does it take for that money to be returned? I cannot support anything that's happened today. I don't want to be seen to be voting for it.
Councillor Clark, we're not actively out looking to prosecute people. We are here.
I've heard it all.
We're here to
Thank you.
protect council money.
Yes, but you haven't tried getting shoes for your kids on benefits. I have, and I cannot support anything that I've heard today. Now, I'm quite happy to be noted that I don't agree. So there you are. It's up to you. Nobody's going to second me because nobody's been in my situation, apparently.
Oh, when I was growing up, Councillor Clark.
So, Chair, just again, this is Councillor Clark, apologies, but the bottom line is that in order for the minute to record your opposition, whatever the basis of that may be, to the recommendations in the report, then as I've set out, the council standing orders would require you to move. Even if you don't get a seconder, that's the means by which your dissent would be recorded. So the option is either to move, not to note. Presumably, you might want to add something or not, but you can move the direct negative. And if you don't get a seconder, then we can competently record your dissent in the minute. If you don't move anything, then in the absence of any vote or alternative amendment, we can't record your dissent in the minute. So you've got a choice to make along those lines, whether you want to move something with or without a seconder or not. The other factor to point out is that your position now is clearly a matter of public record, given that it will be on this recording and it will there be for public viewing. So if you're happy to let it rest, that you've stated your position, we can proceed on that basis. But if you want your dissent to be recorded in the minute, then you need to, I'm afraid, and don't shoot the messenger, this is the council's approved standing orders, you need to move an amendment contrary to the motion, which is to accept the recommendations that has been seconded, and the only way to record your dissent is if nobody seconds you. That's the way the standing orders work. And if somebody does second you, it would go to a vote. So it's really down to you whether you want to let it rest on the basis you've said your piece and it's a matter of record, but won't be in the minute. But if you want your position noted, if you want your position noted in the minute, you would need to go a step further. Apologies.
I've said my piece and I'm happy to leave it there.
On that basis, we'll move to the next item, which I'll hand over to Ailey for the Internal Audit 22-23 Mid-Year Progress Report and the revised Internal Audit Plan.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a standard report that comes up in mid-year to committee, telling you about the good progress in this case that we've made with regard to the audit plan, and presents a revised plan for approval by committee. As committee know, that's good practice, as laid down by SIPFA, and the fact is our plan in the council is a live plan, and you give me delegated authority every year to change the plan as required. We don't normally have to make any significant changes to the plan because our plans seem to be fit for purpose that we approve at the beginning of every year, which is always reassuring. So I'll just touch on a couple of aspects of the report and then take any questions. Paragraph 6 just reminds us that we don't actually need to complete the plan to provide the annual opinion, which is my statutory obligation. I need to give you an opinion at the end of the year on the Council's risk management, internal controls and governance. At the moment, I think we will carry out sufficient work to inform that opinion, and that's really the important assurance that I need to give to you today. So if we move on, members already stole my thunder on paragraph 7, which is the extract from the external audit report, which states about the robust internal audit and the appropriate arrangements for fraud and error. I've laid out in paragraph 9 the key aspects of our most recent professional update from SIPFA on untapped potential, and I had shared that with the members back in June after the plan was approved. And it talks about internal audit not always being allowed to unleash its full potential, its untapped potential. I always kind of joke in this council, it feels like we're well and truly tapped as internal auditors, but there's always continuous improvement. And I can absolutely assure you that we're always minded to look at improvement going forward. That document, we stand up well to that document in terms of the requirements for a modern collaborative internal audit function. It reminds us of the risks of having low capacity in our corporate grip, which is audit, finance, legal, and the risk, particular risk, current risk with regards to recruiting and retaining experienced auditors. We've been working on our service redesign for some time now, conscious of the fact that it's not a perfect world in terms of being able to recruit professional members of staff. So we've got a number of solutions there that we'll be bringing to Cabinet in due course. Paragraph 10 just reminds us about the professional network activity. We're very well placed nationally. I sit in the committee of the Chief Auditors Group, and you'll be delighted to know that the Chief Auditors Group's just recently agreed that the conference is coming back to East Ayrshire, and we're going to have our conference next year down in Cumnock. So that was where our last conference was, so that worked very well. So that's good for our local economy. We booked out a couple of local hotels before, and we put a lot of money into the economy through that group. So I think that's all very positive. Paragraph 12 just reminds us that the table above has shown us that we're doing well in terms of delivering our days, but actually what's more important is what we're doing with our days. So if you look at Appendix 2, which lays out the progress with the audit plan, it's a sea of green, and that's always good. So we use the RAG status to show you progress against the plan. So the majority of jobs are either completed or underway. So making good progress there, and thanks to my team for their hard work. The small advisory allocation we have, I always make a mention of that because for me that's really important to indicate our agile and collaborative approach and the fact that people don't hesitate to come and approach us. And so far this year we've had 53 small advisory items, and that covers various areas, grants and payments to service users, etc. So we will always have that flexibility. Appendix 3 shows us our current position for follow-ups. You know that we've got now just over 3 year pattern in this council of services doing 100% implementation of internal audit recommendations, and so far this year that's continued. So that's always nice to see, and I hope it means that our recommendations are landing in a way that's encouraging engagement, and we will continue to work with services to support the implementation. Paragraph 14 lays out the work we've done around the context of following the public pound, which requires us to follow monies out with the boundaries of the council. So, for example, the monies that go to East Ayrshire Leisure Trust and IGB, part of the assurance and governance around that transfer of funds is that we are the internal auditors for those entities as well. Paragraph 15 gives you an update on the SIAS external quality assessment. Members agreed to us going ahead with a set of arrangements to put that statutory obligation in place back in June. So we've now concluded that exercise. The The EQA will be carried out by SIPFA. I think it's probably the best possible organisation as the standard setter for the public sector, and it will be carried out in the week beginning the 23rd of January. And as part of that assessment, they obviously assess how my team work to make sure we're compliant and then adding added value. They'll speak to some key officers and they will speak to some elected members. So we will support everybody through that process. The obligations of this committee under the SIAS are laid out in the Internal Audit Charter, and the links there, and at paragraph 16 lays out the 6 obligations of committee, and we can easily evidence that you comply with those obligations through the scheduled work of this committee. So I'm hoping for a good exercise that gives us some continuous improvement, but we'll find that in due course once the exercise is concluded. We will bring the results of that exercise back to committee in April next year. The revisions to the plan are laid out in paragraph 16 and following and summarised in table 2. So no significant changes. The changes reflect the prioritisation of current risk. For example, we're going to look at the energy billing arrangements given the changes around energy costs. We've provided some further clarification around our approach. For example, job 11, continuous auditing. We're going to make greater use of data analytics there, which was part of the suggested aspiration within the untapped potential publication. So I think you'll find that all of the changes there are to reflect current risk and also link in to the core controls of the council. Paragraph 26 lays out the standard wording for the risks around the delivery of our service. And the main risk for any internal audit service is about the work not being carried out to an acceptable standard. And that's the risk that we can control, and that's controlled through the audit manager and the assurance that you get from external audit, as has been mentioned earlier. So paragraph 27 just lays out, if we do come across any resourcing issues during the year, that we will continue to use the established principle of deferring items at the lower end of the risk spectrum. So I will make sure that that happens to deliver the appropriate level of work so that you can have the annual opinion at the end of the year for the council. That was everything I was going to say in the report, Chair. So happy to take questions as always. Thank you.
Okay, members, are there any comments or questions? Councillor Cannon.
Thanks for that report, Ailey. Obviously, when I was looking at the plan, the revised plan, I was keen to know when the rent arrears and the council tax collection audits were last done, because obviously there's going to be some pressures around that. And the first thing was just a comment really. I was pleased to know that 2020-21 was the rent arrears and there was a sound assurance, and on the council tax it was 19-20 and there was a follow-up in 2021 and it was sound in most areas, so and that was obviously pleasing. Just some of the other members have raised the kind of points. I mean, just in terms of the controls around those, obviously we're trying to collect that and collect the monies, but am I right in thinking that there would be controls so that we identify this very early and then use that to bring in financial inclusion teams, for example, so that we're helping people? We're not trying to penalise people again. We're trying to help people by identifying these things early and then helping them to manage their affairs accordingly. So these would be early warning indicators. So maybe you can just, you might not have the granular detail, but I mean, just to confirm the principle.
Maybe any that Joe wants to come in as well, so that's very much under his remit. Both of those jobs were jobs that we carried out for Joe in terms of rent accounting and in terms of council tax collection, and as you said, the controls were very good. Rent arrears, we looked at the driver for looking at rent accounting at that point in time was COVID, and because we recognised that might have an impact on rent collection, and very much we're minded to making sure that council policy is also carried out. So it's not just about the pound signs in terms of internal audit. So we would absolutely be looking to make sure that, the community has been supported through the financial inclusion team, for example. But Joe can speak on more eloquently than I can on the detail there.
Through you, Chair, and just quickly, if you take council tax as the example, we bill for council tax following the setting of that rate by council. Thereafter, the follow-up is fairly regulated by the legislation about what happens at first reminder stage and what happens at second reminder stage, and we follow that guidance. What we do, though, is that we are mindful of the pressures that families are facing. It's demonstrated in East Ayrshire performance where we get £9.5 million a year to provide council tax benefit, or council tax reduction as it's called. We're currently spending £500,000 more than that this year. We haven't done that before. So we're seeing that out there's a need for people to get that additional support. So as part of the billing process, if that's not up to date, if the person hasn't maybe approached us or have applied for that necessary relief, that tends to happen as soon as the bills go out or as soon as standing orders or direct debits begin to fail and we get in touch. Then we can signpost them, maybe not in the first instance the financial inclusion team per se, but I suppose the first is to say, are you eligible for relief for this? And if so, then we apply the relief. And then at that point, there's other options through Scottish Welfare Fund and Financial Inclusion Team to provide that support. So that's what we do. So it's not just the punitive action around, first reminder, second reminder, don't pay second reminder, you need to pay the whole lot. We've got processes in place to try and work alongside that regulation, but at the same time do so in a helpful and an understanding way. And it's demonstrated through the CTR overspend that we're looking at the moment.
Thanks.
Sir Richardson.
It's just a question to Joe on the mechanics of collecting council tax, because obviously from my background, mortgages, etc. And I know that young people especially, Joe, when they're just getting used to running their family budget, they maybe don't appreciate just how important it is to pay things like council tax, because as soon as you get a default with Experian or any of the other credit reference agencies, you might be 21, 22 and don't understand what impact that can have when you're 26, 27, 28 and you're trying to get a mortgage. Because you go to, yourself, you go to a mortgage lender with that sort of default, £1,000 or whatever council tax on your credit reference report, the chances of getting a mortgage are minimal. Or if you can get a mortgage, you're probably going to pay subprime rates, which are extortionate. So the question I've got is on that sort of, first reminder, second reminder, it probably then goes to sheriff's officers. At what stage did East Ayrshire Council put the default on a payer's credit reference agency?
Through your Chair. So as I said, it's fairly regulated in terms of first reminder, second reminders, and if you don't get a response to the second reminder, then it gets through a process supported by David and his team where it will then go to summary warrant. And that summary warrant will be placed either in Kilmarnock Sheriff Court or in Ayrshire Sheriff Court. And from that, that's only done though after a whole number of letters and reminders have been sent out to the householder. I would imagine at the point where there's action taken by sheriff officers to recover, that will take place. Where that fails and where there's prospect of success, but it then takes other means through, for example, arrestments and the like, then I think at that point that's when the credit will be impacted, or the credit rating will be impacted. But it's not impacted generally at our side. It's once the debt leaves us and there's a prospect of recovery, but it isn't recovered, then the sheriff officer will of course go into the next level that they have. They've got different tools that we don't have, and they'll complete those. But it's not uncommon for us to have householders who have payment plans with sheriff officers. So there's it's put into tubal chunks to be paid back, and that's done as well. And we do wherever we can. We're very mindful of the fees that then apply to outstanding amounts from sheriff officers and other fees. And so we try wherever possible to keep them to minimum by intervening early. And it's not uncommon for us to call things back from sheriff officers to try and recover ourselves.
Thanks for that, Joe. Cheers.
Okay. I'd just like to note, it's good to see the ICTP cyber contingency on the plan, particularly after the Home Secretary's phone was hacked. I think that's really, really good. Comforted to know that we're in the hands of Ian Aston and Paul Toland in that respect. And also the energy billing, which is a new risk to the council. So it's good to see that in that plan. All righty. Okay, oops, Councillor Canning.
So I don't know if Aileen wanted to just say something. When I was looking at that, I was thinking about the outage that we had for almost a day not too long ago. So I think Paul's agreed to do a members briefing on that. I don't know if Aileen wants to say any more, but
I think Councillor Cannon had emailed me about this yesterday, just asked from an internal audit perspective. Paul Toland and Ian Aston and I have running commentary about cyber security because I think it's on our minds all the time. And if any instances like that, which are few and far between, I would always say to Paul and Ian, you know, is there any licence there, anything new? That there were no new risks, nothing that we didn't know how to deal with. So there was nothing that raised the risk for me in terms of the audit plan. But that was in the context of the wealth of work that we do with the ICT service, and we're soon going to bring the report to the members for the review of the lessons learned from the SEPA attack, and that's been an incredibly detailed piece of work that we've been working on with IT, and final report will be sound assurance in most areas. We get a great service from Joe and his team. And I'm happy to say that, very loudly at this committee. We follow a rolling assurance programme of audits, and the audit that's featured in the plan at the moment is cloud computing. And we're going to look at cloud because cloud is something that's been growing and growing, the use of cloud over the last year or so, last few years. So it's timely that we look at it. The other option we had in our rolling programme is disaster recovery and business continuity. That is covered in the SEPA licence, so members will see that aspect through that report. It's the rolling assurance programme we have is informed by the National Cyber Security Centre risks, and we've had that rolling plan in place for a number of years now as a council. Not all councils have a rolling plan to audit ICT and cyber security. We do, well-established plan, and we get a huge level of engagement with our ICT colleagues. In fact, Paul Toland was at my team meeting yesterday to talk to the team about any new risks that might be emerging from the digital strategy, so that dialogue is constant. And by all the audit work we've done indicates that we have very good coverage through our ICT team. That doesn't mean we don't have risk. And I think members realise that you can't put all the controls you want in place, but you're still at risk. And for me, it's about how we react to that risk and make sure we've got the tools in place, for example, with backup, that if the worst was to happen, that we could be up and running as soon as possible. So those are sort of areas that we are minded to look at with the team. But there'll be commentary on that within the SEPA licence learned report when that comes out in the next few weeks.
Joe, you want to come back in?
Through your chair, I think it's important that we decouple the downtime and cyber security. That was not due to a security incident. That's due to essentially the IT estate that of a scale of an estate the size and scale of our own that does curricular and does corporate. Then it's not uncommon for some infrastructure, hosted or unhosted, to fall over. At that point, our team deploy and we bring that back up as soon as we can. Sometimes supported by the supplier and the contractor as well, but just to reassure members and wider audience that that was not due to a security incident. We've got the digital strategy approved last week. You know where we stand on cyber. We've got cyber security and now a cyber defence, proactive in both parts to make sure that we can, wherever possible, protect the council. You know, that's turning into a 24/7 job.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Okay, members, I'm going to move the recommendations, page 83, paragraph 2. If you can agree those. particularly point 3, where we're approving the revised live internal audit plan 22-23, as laid out in appendices 1 to 4, reflecting relatively minor changes and continuing to reflect current risks and more controls. Are we agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item 7, Joe, bonds and financial guarantees update.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll be brief, members, because this is essentially a consolidated report. It's a report that takes its information from reports that were presented to various committees in the last few months. It's right and proper for councils to have bonds and guarantees. The type of work we do, the type of planning arrangements we have in place means that we secure and safeguard the council by requiring contractors and suppliers to provide us with bonds upon which we can call in if certain things were to happen. It's of a long-standing arrangement in the council. We have an accounting policy built in specifically for this purpose. It lays down the requirements placed on each relevant head of service that has a bond or a guarantee. Paragraph 9 provides some of those heads of service details and the types of bonds that are in place. They essentially, if you were to dissect them, fall into two main parts. Those associated with planning, and you can see at paragraph 12 the types of bonds, that are types of developments that require bonds to be put in place. I can reassure members that the work that our planning colleagues do, supported by David and myself, and the roles and responsibilities that fall upon us, are such that we are content that that process works well, and we have got arrangements in place to monitor those bonds, supported at all times by relevant colleagues, and recognising that it's the responsibility of respective heads of service to make sure that their bonds are in place. So essentially planning, a large number of bonds for planning. The second type is around roads construction consents, where, for example, developers building a new estate and they're putting in the infrastructure that starts the foundations of the road that will apply within that development. And at that point, our head of Ayrshire Roads Alliance puts in place necessary arrangements and necessary bonds with that contractor to make sure that the roads that we will thereafter inherit and adopt have been made and built to a proper standard. There's some non-residential bonds. They are listed at paragraph 24. They are where we have an operation that takes place within our boundary that has such a flow of traffic, for example, that it causes an advanced or an accelerated deterioration of specific parts of our network, and they are listed there, and the bonds are in place and managed by the relevant head of service. Two other bonds, one in facilities and property management, and it's to do with a contractor who is doing a piece of capital work, and the nature of that work required us to have a bond in place in case that contractor failed, and that bond was duly called in. And the final one is in paragraph 29. It relates to a financial guarantee provided by the former head of Ayrshire, where it goes back to a bond or a guarantee provided to Strathclyde Pension Fund in respect of a previous body called the West of Scotland Loans Fund. It was located in East Ayrshire, but applied to the whole of the former Strathclyde region. That West of Scotland Loans Fund has been subsumed into Business Loans Scotland. The financial guarantee that's been given has within it an undertaking with relevant councils across Scotland that if it was to be called in terms of that pension liability, then all contributing councils into Business Loans Scotland would contribute towards that financial guarantee. So as I said at the start, Chair, it's a report that takes on board previous reports sent to committees. It's relevant that it comes to your committee, given that it's for governance and for scrutiny, and we take on board the assurances provided by officers previously to those committees, and we provide in one place through this report a consolidation of all those previous entries that have been passed to committee this year.
Thanks, Joel. Can I just ask you, in relation to paragraph 29, can you provide more detail on the financial guarantee that was provided by the former head of HR, and if the sole liability still lies with East Ayrshire Council?
Absolutely, Chair, and through you. It was for a handful of staff. There were not many staff in West of Scotland Loans Fund. I think it was probably less than 5. But they, as we know from what Pat has said earlier on, they begin to build up a pension liability as they remain in service and as they grow older. That guarantee was provided to the pension fund, and that's only right and proper because the pension fund is there to protect itself and so seeks a guarantee from a relevant council, in this case ours. Supported by David and his team, we worked with West of Scotland Loans Fund when we realised that they were to be subsumed into a new company called Business Loan Scotland, and in doing so we took measures to make sure that that guarantee doesn't just rest with East Ayrshire or indeed with the 12 former authorities within Strathclyde. Given that those staff will now work for Business Loan Scotland and provide a service across the whole of Scotland, then that guarantee, if called in, will be provided in part by all relevant councils who are within Business Loan Scotland. So it's a diminishing, it was set up in that way, but the risk to the council is low given we've got that undertaking from other councils to contribute if it was ever to be called in.
Thanks, Joe. Any members? Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, but it was just in relation to the bonds. Obviously, we had no enough funds put by for the open cast, but Joe has answered all my questions, so it's just basically to say thanks very much for that. It looks that we're on the ball this time. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Peter?
Browsing through it about the open cast, I noticed Appendix 1 and the restoration, the guarantee. There's one jumping out. I mean, the other ones are 200,000, 200,000, 800,000. There's one there for Braehead at 9.4 million. I was wondering why that's such a huge amount of difference. Is it a huge site that's going to need a huge amount of work to restore? Is that why it's a bigger bond?
David, do you want to come in on that?
Apologies there. Just bear with me. Sorry, this is the joys of working at home there. I was in the middle of a domestic dispute. Just refer me to the page. Sorry, Chair.
Oh, apologies, David. It's page 112 and it's Braehead.
Apologies, as you know, Chair, and for the benefit of other members, we do look at these at the pre-agenda. The trouble I'm having at the moment is the print's so small I can hardly read it. The Braehead is one of the... Excuse me. We have regular meetings. Braehead is Keir in terms of one of the former open cast sites. So if you just give me a moment. Paul, I really actually can't read this just now. Could you maybe take the next question and come back to me if that's okay, just to give me time to read it? I don't want to hold things up, but I actually might need to go off camera and get a magnifying glass here if you can't believe this. If you give me 2 seconds, Chair, I will come back to this question. It's unusual, but I'll need to go and read this. Just give me 2 seconds.
No worries, David, take your time. Does anybody else have any questions or comments meantime?
Could I maybe just say in the meantime,
yes,
there's been a number of pieces of internal audit work around the bonds, and all of those reports are on your councillors' notice board. So we've looked at the financial guarantees for the wind turbines, and we've also looked at the roads bonds, and both of those exercises gave good outcomes, and all the recommendations were 100% implemented. So we can provide some assurance through that work in terms of the wider context here.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks. Just give David some time to look at this.
Right, sorry, if I could maybe just ask Councillor Maven to repeat his inquiry then. The bottom line is I had a meeting with Keir just last month in relation to all of their operations, because they've actually completed most of the restoration and they are moving into aftercare. So the purpose of the meeting was they're moving it from their operational arm to their estates arm in terms of Greenburn, in terms of the overall complex which makes up Greenburn, which is Well Hill, Dalgig, sorry, and Braehead. So there really aren't any particular issues, but Councillor Maven, rather than trying to get it mentioned a shortfall or a gap in the figures, it was just to clarify the question, sorry.
David, sorry, David. It was really just an observation that Councillor Maben had made, and it was regarding the bond, the £9.4 million restoration bond.
Yeah, that was the value that was put in the last time the bond was required to be reviewed, but obviously we review the bond on a periodic basis every 5 years, so that would have been the outstanding liability at a previous point in time. But as the narrative sets out, if we were to call that bond now, it would be a much reduced figure because all the restoration's been delivered. So that simply reflects the value of the bond that when it was last put in place at its highest before they delivered the restoration. And the narrative now sets out the current modern up-to-date position, which is they have completed almost all of the restoration over all of the Greenburn complex as a whole, and they are moving into aftercare. So if we were to call that bond now, it would obviously only be to the value required, which would be a greatly reduced value. It's simply a matter of the timing because we review and require them to replace bonds on a 5-yearly basis. So that one obviously was put in place at an earlier stage when the situation was greatly different. I've recorded before, and we took the paper to council in March in terms of kind of bringing the overall open cast scenario to an end. And we've written a lot about what we've done as a council, working with other partners to restore the sites that failed to us to deliver restoration of. But one of the points that should not be lost as well is that Kier throughout this process didn't adopt the same approach as Scottish Coal and ATH. Kier did manage their own responsibilities and liabilities, and Kier have contributed to the overall successful response to the open cast scenario because they have continued to deal with their own restoration deficit, and they have delivered the restoration of that site by their own means. So the bond was at its highest when they had a lot more to do, and the current position is there's very little left to do. I hope that answers it, and apologies there. That's the joys of working from home, you get more distractions. Apologies.
Thanks, David. Okay. Councillor Richardson.
Can I just ask David something, because he said something that was really interesting to me there. He mentioned that Scottish Coal didn't really live up to their obligations with regards to restoration. I mean, is that not like the old coal board? Was that not a government entity? And how can they walk away from their liabilities with regards putting sites back to a decent condition, David? Just when you mentioned Scottish Coal having not met their obligations.
What Scottish Coal did in April 2013 was they put themselves in liquidation, and so did ATH in England. And basically there were different outcomes because they're in different legal jurisdictions. But in essence, the aim of both of those companies was to effectively wind up through the liquidation process, having declared themselves insolvent. And what they sought to do, and it was a deliberate tactic that they planned out for months in advance, what they sought to do was abandon the land they owned that hadn't been restored. Now, in England, they got away with that because, without going into all the detail, in England, it's a slightly different regime for the insolvency or the liquidation process. And there was a quirk in the legislation that meant they were successful. So ATH in England in April 13 basically went into liquidation and sought to divest themselves of the most onerous bits of ground, the voids, the Grand Canyon lookalikes that were peppered all around the south of the area. In Scotland, Scottish Coal, and the two of them were in cahoots. They were working together. It was a plan. And I'll come back to the point about the coal board, depending how far you want to go in this, but it's not for just now. But the headlines are that Scottish Coal tried the same thing, and ourselves and SEPA objected to that. And there was a court case at the Court of Session that was determined in December 2013. And the outcome of that was the Court of Session went to great lengths to find a good justification, which they put forward to support a decision that didn't allow the liquidators of Scottish Coal to just abandon the onerous land. And it comes down to the quirks of liquidation and the role of the liquidator and the fact that any debt he incurs is personal expenses and they get priority against any other creditors, etc. But cut a long story short, in Scotland, Scottish Coal were not allowed just to walk away from the land. And the outcome of that was they had to make arrangements to transfer it all to Hargreaves. who then took it on. And at that time, nearly 9-10 years ago, they took it on with the intention to see if they could coal any further out. But then the bottom fell out the open cast market within about 12 months after that, and they had to change their plans. So in Scotland, Scottish Coal had that intent, but they weren't allowed. In England, ATH got away with it, which is why, as part of the restoration of Pulharnell and Dilfad, Grieve Hill and Garleffen, which the council, along with Scottish Government, Mines Restoration Limited and the charitable trust that sat above that, SMRT, it was all put in place by Scottish Government as part of their response in 2013. The bottom line is that we objected to that. The court didn't let Scottish Coal walk away, and ultimately they had to transfer to, as I said, to Hargreaves by way of a disposal. I think they paid Hargreaves to take it off them as part of the settlement. The council had to apply under the Companies Act as part, as I said, of the restoration for the ATH land that they did abandon, and the council actually ended up taking title in the first instance to the voids at Grieve Hill and Garleffen and at Scares, if I remember right, before then transferring them on to the current landowners who are bringing the land back into use. So the point that was made was in April 2013, because most of the open cast activity was concentrated in East Ayrshire, with the 75% of either the UK or the Scottish at the time, it was an eye-watering figure, then most of the impacts were felt in East Ayrshire. And I think I just said the other day at a different meeting that I think it was the planning committee last Friday, that the headline figures when the brown stuff hit the Whirly thing in April 2013 were, one, that to restore all of the unrestored land was broadly estimated to amount to the equivalent surface area of 4,500 football pitches. But if it was only a few inches deep, that would have been one thing. Some of that surface area was like the Grand Canyon and represented voids that were hundreds of metres or tens of metres deep. So it only gives you a flavour. The other figure that was put into the public domain, and probably by hindsight, not the wisest thing we did, but the exercise was undertaken in 2013 to quantify how much it was estimated to restore all the sites in accordance with original consents. And that produced a figure of something like 161 million, which is a figure I'll take to my grave. In fact, between ourselves, SMRT and MRL, between £10 million that the council put in, 10 million the Scottish Government put in, and 24 million we were able to recover in the bonds that were in place, we've been able to deliver all of the restoration to date that we have delivered, and we have 5 million in the bank for Chalmerston, which is the last site. So the point is that Scottish Coal and ATH both tried to just walk away from the onerous sites, the unrestored land, and leave it effectively for the state in the form of the local authority as the authority of last resort under environmental legislation to clear it up. Members may be aware that there was a lot of opprobrium, and rightly so at that time. There were regulatory failures at every level, central government, Scottish government and local authority level. But one of the views that was put forward from academics at the time was that the deficit, the restoration deficit, was actually built in as far back as the 1980s when the coal industry was reprivatised and moved back into private ownership. The point being made that when that transfer back into private ownership took place, there was not enough provision in the bank at that time to deliver the restoration that was outstanding at that time. So there's an argument to be made that the restoration was always behind where it should have been from the early 80s onwards, and that situation just continued and was compounded with each further operation or extension of operation that was granted. So there is a lot more to it, which is why we're trying to put it behind us. The council focused on dealing with the restoration. We took the paper to council in March to try and not draw a veil over things. We've been quite open about everything, but to try and bring things to a reasonable conclusion, noting, as I say, that most of the sites now are in aftercare. North Kyle will deliver the restoration of House of Water, and the council, by agreement with FLS and Hargreaves, will deliver the restoration of Chalmerston, which is the last outstanding one, and that will sensibly come after they've set up and constructed the North Kyle site and delivered the restoration on that part of it. So it's a long story, and apologies, that's a long answer, and I appreciate it's been a long morning, but members, I'm happy to share more. I would refer members to the papers
the paper that went up to council in March of this year. I know a lot of you weren't elected then, but it's available on the website, and that sets out the last 10-year journey. But yes, the fundamental fact is the ATH got away with it and Scottish Coal didn't, and that was their clear commercial approach. Basically just set to one side the unrestored land and leave it to the state.
Thanks, David. Thank you. Okay, members, there's no other questions or comments. I'm going to move the recommendations, page 105. Okay, are we agreed? Okay. Okay, Joe, hand over to yourself for the annual Treasury Management Review.
Thank you, Chair. And members, this is the annual Treasury Management Review. It's a report that is for noting today and for your approval to remit to Council. And that seems quite formal because this process does have a great deal of formality about it. There are 3 reports presented to members each year on Treasury. The first is the Treasury strategy that accompanies the budget. That's the one that sets the scene for the year ahead. Halfway through that year, we present a mid-year report to this committee, and at the end of the year, we present the end-of-year report. So what you've got before you today is the 2021-22 end-of-year Treasury Management Report. In normal years, it's a report that is fairly static. However, with what's been happening in the last few months, some of the information here that dates back to 2021 has been superseded with the events that's happened recently. When members set the strategy, they approve the strategy and they set a range of prudential indicators. They're the rules that govern the Treasury management arrangements for the year that's to go ahead. In those rules and in those Treasury indicators, they set levels around affordability and sustainability and security and the like. And I'm glad to note at paragraph 9 that based on the conclusion of the external audit today by Pat and the team, and by the completion of the annual accounts and this end-of-year report on the Treasury management, that I'm able to tell this committee and indeed Council later on that all of those indicators that were set have been adhered to and there has been no issues with any of them. The strategy then begins to lay down some information around our capital expenditure and our funding arrangements for 21-22. Paragraph 12 sets out the split of that expenditure between the general fund and the housing revenue account. It shows how that capital expenditure was funded, and you can see receipts, capital receipts, reserves and borrowing. You can see as well that in terms of the estimated borrowing for that year against the actual, that there was a reprofiling took place by colleagues in facility and property management around November of that year that saw £30 million transition from 2021 into 21, and from 21-22 into 2022-23. And what this report does, this is the financial consequence of that reprofiling. With the mechanics of that reprofiling taking place, then there's no longer a need to borrow for that same level of funding in that year. And so you see that slippage or that reprofiling taking place, and it's explained in the following paragraphs that are on that page. We then have the Council's overall borrowing need for that year. That's known as the Capital Financing Requirement, or our CFR. It's a limit that is set, and you can see that showing in Table 19. And again, when you feed that through, you can see that in terms of that advances that were provided for that borrowing, that too had a consequential movement in reprofiling too. Those advances are the internal loans fund advances given to services, where we make arrangements to essentially, where we borrow globally, we advance a loans fund rate to services, and those loans fund advances for the following years are profiled at Table 3 on paragraph 21. Our gross borrowing and our capital financing requirement then is shown in detail from paragraphs 23 onwards, and is captured in Table 4. And what that shows is that it essentially almost decouples the capital expenditure in the building of an asset with the borrowing and the funding and the financing and the treasury management that flows with it. So they're not aligned. They're not possibly ever aligned, because where we're building an asset today and we're paying the contractor, if we have money in our bank, then we would use that money first rather than going to the market to borrow. And that's just something you do in your own household as well. So what that table shows is that for the end of 2021-22, we had £95 million of under borrowing. We'd used our reserves that were getting a very low rate of interest to pay those bills rather than go to the market and take that borrowing. It's something that it's moved since then, as you would imagine, and that figure is now not as large. But it's just how the capital expenditure and how the treasury don't always walk in tandem. The financing may be at a different timescale or achieved or taken at a different rate from when you actually open the door and go into the new asset. When you set the treasury strategy, you, as I said, set a level of prudential indicators. They are showing at paragraph 26. There's limits around the borrowing and the operational boundary. And one that's interesting, and it was mentioned in the recent medium-term financial strategy, is around the actual financing costs as a proportion of the revenue stream. In other words, how much are you paying in interest against the income you're receiving, that pound of council tax and that pound of rent? And you can see at table 5 then that for the general fund, that's about 6.5%. And for the housing revenue account is about 17%. And that's why you're seeing, against the current backdrop and moving into today's field, you're seeing last week in that medium-term financial strategy a recommendation to council that was accepted for myself and colleagues to review the scale of that planned £500 million of capital expenditure that's due to take place between now and 2027. And you're already seeing an earlier copy of East Ayrshire Firm's report that the Head of Housing and Communities is taking the opportunity to look at the council house build programme and the scale of that, given that, as Pat Kenny touched on, the build costs are increasing significantly and it's costing more money to borrow to do it. So you'll see that in the reports that are presented to Cabinet this month, in fact, from the Head of People and Culture. Paragraph 29 then shows our Treasury position at the 31st of March 2022. It shows where we've taken our borrowing from, and you can see between PWLB, that Public Works Loan Board, which is a Treasury, some money market funds because we borrow for 40, 50 years. And so maybe 20, 25 years ago, it was attractive to go to the market to get some money rather than go to PWLB, and that's just what we did. And you can see the structure of table 7 shows the maturity and where those loans are sitting. PWLB market loans and market logos, and we've got some money that we've borrowed for less than 365 days. And that is important because not all the borrowing we take is to build things. Some of the borrowing is to allow day-to-day running to take place, or cash flow. And that's just what we do. In paragraph 35, we begin to talk about our investments for that year. We mention almost doughy-eyed at paragraph 37 that CPI was at 6.2% in February 2022. And it's where I touched on that earlier point about how this report normally it remains fairly static, but as we read on through those sections and from paragraph 40 onwards, you begin to see, just how challenging today's market is than it was in 2021-22. That under-borrowed position takes careful management. It doesn't mean we need to rush out and borrow. We did take some money. We did take some borrowing about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We took £25 million over 50 years, and we just brought that in, and that is sitting in there. We didn't need it. We've actually given it back to the debt management office in the Treasury for them to hold for us. But we set limits with our Treasury advisors that when rates at a certain point, we'll go to the market and we'll take some money, and that's just what we do as part of that arrangement. And you're seeing in borrowing rates at paragraph 45, paragraph 49 talking about government gilts being at 1.45%. That has changed considerably, and we then see the rates that go. It gives some details of the borrowing that was taking place, the planned borrowing that was due to take place, and the actual borrowing, and a further detail at paragraph 8. You can see at that table, at table 8, where our investments are. So we've borrowed £25 million from Public Works Loan Board and then put it back in, and we've got some money from, we've got some borrowing from other local authorities, and that's really common. Because some councils may need some short-term money just to pay wages or pay invoices, and that's what we do through our treasury management arrangements. As part of those treasury indicators, we note whether we had to borrow for advanced needs, and we have not borrowed for advance of need, nor have we borrowed for profit either. And you can see our investment outturn and where we invest our money along those security, liquidity and yield, that we had no issues maintaining the council's liquidity in 2021-22. Our counterparties are listed at table 9, and our reserves are as listed. There's no immediate financial implications arising from this report. Things have changed and continue to change. The Treasury team are looking continue at this. I spoke with colleagues as recently as Monday on our next discussion on Treasury, and that's a discussion that takes place every day within that relevant manager's portfolio and with relevant colleagues. It's the end of your report. You'll see soon in the next month or so the current year's mid-term report, which will be presented to this committee and thereafter passed to council. And it's important, given the scale of it and given the requirements of the SIPA Code of Practice and Treasury, that this council sees this report first. But it's only right and proper, SIPA deems, that is then presented to full council to let all council members realise the extent of the treasury arrangements that take place within this council and other councils too. Happy to stop there, Chair, and take any questions from members.
Thanks, Joe. Can I just ask you, it states we're under borrowed. Just can you explain what this means and how it comes about, how it arises in terms of sort of treasury management?
It's a process where we look when we are, for example, building a school and the contractor has submitted the architect's certificate and the payment's due to be paid. We make that payment, but if we have enough money in our bank or if we have enough money coming in through other investments, then we'll use that to pay that contractor. So what you don't see is the doors opening of a new school and then the borrowing hitting the council. We don't do that because the most effective way to keep our own costs down whilst managing that overall risk is to use our own money, because we're getting, well, first of all, we have it, and secondly, it's attracting a very small interest rate. If we were to go to the market, we would then have our own money in the bank getting a very low interest rate. We'd go to the market and take something probably 3, 4, 5, 6 times that interest rate to borrow and use that to pay the contractor. And at that point, that's not good treasury management. There's times for that, but there's times when, against that whole process of just overseeing the treasury function, that there's times when we would use our own money. We have underborrowed. That was a significant underborrowed position there. It's lessened from that, but it doesn't mean that we need to go out to the market straight away to get that. We would just continue to manage that. We know from the forecast that we'll get, and they'll be updated on the 17th of November, that interest rates, well, the announcement will be made probably in the next half hour about interest rates today, but we expect interest rates, all the indicators are, they'll return to a lower level from today in about a year and a half, 2 years' time.
Thanks, Joe. Councillor Richardson.
It was just a quick question for Joe. One of the things I noticed was, see, like interlocal authority borrowing or lending. Is it just a case that when one local authority, one council lends to another, they do so at low rates? Just, I know that this is coming from a time when interest rates were lower, but we seem to be getting money from other local authorities at pretty decent rates. Joe, is that just the way that it's done?
So if you've got a short-term liquidity and you want some money for, say, a week or a month, then you instruct our treasury advisors who will then place that and say, you know, East Ayrshire Council is looking for £2 million or £10 million for 30 days. And then at that point, there are councils who have money that they need to invest. So, for example, in this council, our treasury management that you approved doesn't let this council hold all its money in the Royal. Our bankers are the Royal Bank of Scotland. We can't hold it in the RBS account in Glasgow. We can't. We need to place it in registered counterparties that you approve based on their credit rating, and so we pass that through that. So there are times when we've got money that we need to put somewhere, and if a council is looking for it for 30 days, then we will place it with them and give it to them, and we'll get a minimum interest rate back. But at that point, you're talking about security, liquidity, and yield. So is that investment going to be secure? And it absolutely is when it goes to another local authority. And then can you get it back in 30 days? Well, you can. And only once those two conditions are satisfied, do you look at the interest rate that's been applied. And that's the right way to do it. You don't want to go into the market hunting for the best rate, because that then can on occasions compromise security.
Councillor Watts?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, Joe. I mean, yeah, the Bank of England has put interest rates up by 0.75% to the highest rate for 30 years, just to 3%. So how much is that going to impact us as a council?
So through you, Chair. So that's a kind of challenging one to answer, because it would assume they're going to go out and collect the whole £95 million that's under borrowed. We would never do that. So we're getting constant feeds from our Treasury advisors that say gilts will begin to fall in 2 months' time or 3 months' time. They're looking at, they don't just look at East Ayrshire nor the UK. So looking globally, they're seeing what's happening with American interest rates, and how when those rise, that then causes a consequential favourable or disadvantage or adverse impact on the UK market that then causes other things to take place. So to put a cost on it would be challenging. I suppose if we were to take some money, we would work out when we do it and circulate it. If we were to take some borrowing at a specific rate, and then the rates were to go up, the question would be, had you taken that borrowing 2 days later at those higher rates, what would those costs be? But that's I'll work that out and maybe send that round. But it's something where we get advice every single day, sometimes several times a day. Bulletins and alerts will come into us to let us know what's happening with the market generally and what's happening with the worldwide market. And that's why when you read the strategy at the back end of it, you'll get a whole piece on global economics, because that's relevant when you're setting that policy. That for that one report, you get the greater advice that comes in through our Treasury advisors to help you inform that decision. So that's where we are. But I'll work out that and get some calculations around you.
Okay. Councillor Canning?
Because you keep saying Treasury advisors, that's an external party we use as opposed to, or what is it, a government entity, or is it a private entity? Who is it we use for Treasury advisors?
So through support from David and his procurement team, we tender for these contracts, and we have our current Treasury advisor is Link Treasury Advisors, and we have a great relationship with them. They're working alongside us in terms of service concession arrangements, that matter that we spoke about at council last week, and they're in regular contact with the team in terms of the rates and their projections. So they'll have their own experts that are scouring over all sorts of data that are projecting where the rates will be in 6 months, 2 years, 5 years time. And that's really helpful for us in terms of when we enter the market and when we choose to delay.
Thanks.
Members, any other questions, comments? Okay, so I'll move the recommendations, page 136. We're all agreed. Okay, thanks, Joe. We'll go across to David for your report. Governance and Scrutiny Committee Annual Self-Assessment 2022 and the Action Plan Update and Annual Self-Assessment 23. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Chair. Just before I get into this one, just a slight clarification. Now I've actually been able to locate my magnifying glass and check out the details on page 112. Apologies, I should have made it clear that for Greenburn, in terms of the care operation, that figure reflects a parent company guarantee rather than a bond.
And I think what you have there is the original value of the guarantee they put in place at the outset, rather than what I said about it being a bond. I've just been able to read the small print. So it was the value of the parent company guarantee, but obviously the actual liability is a fraction of that value now. In terms of this paper then, thanks for your forbearance, members. You'll recall you had a brief introduction to this. This is a fairly new addition to our overall governance arrangements, and we presented the output from the first self-assessment. So this is, in the world of audit, this is considered to be good practice and emerging good practice. We conducted the first one in April because it was considered that it was better for those who had served in the committee prior to the election. I was conscious of the timing, but we still thought it was better for those members that had had experience on the committee to carry out the first assessment rather than park it till after the election. But we did bring back the output from that to an earlier meeting of this council committee since the election, and that's when you had your first taste of it. What this now is simply an update on the items in the action plan and proposals, well, either an update on the ones that have been actioned and proposals as to how we might deal with the other ones, recognising we're in a bit of a transition here from the previous arrangements prior to the election. We have, as we identified at the last meeting, we have virtually the whole of the team here on GNS in terms of members are new to the council as well as to the committee. And therefore it's just taking account of the fact that you all need time to grow into the roles, to evolve and develop, and to identify what else you think you might reasonably require from us in terms of support, etc. So that's the general context. If I just maybe take members to the action plan and then work back to the recommendations, there isn't much in this. It is just about how, if it's in the view of the members, we might improve things, how to go about it. So from the audit or the self-assessment that we carried out in April, one of the matters that came up there at page 153 under the general checklist question of do we have an effective audit committee structure and composition, then one outstanding matter is the potential, and it's no higher than that, and it would be for the committee to determine, is the potential to give consideration to, and if agreed, to then seek to locate and bring onto the committee an independent member or members. That's not something the council, in terms of the previous governance arrangements and the scheme of deals, that we have considered. It's not something that's been considered and rejected. It's just not something that's actually been really considered before, and therefore it is appropriate that at some point that this committee take a view on that. It seems to be the emerging position of, I think, SITFA, that this is seen to be as good practice, and I think folk understand the principle, but equally I think you have to have regard to the current membership and composition of the committee, and you'd want to be satisfied that bringing anyone else on is going to add value. What we're proposing in terms of the recommendations is that there's no great urgency to address this. It comes within the first 6 months of the life of this committee under current membership, and the recommendation reflects the proposal that, given there is no absolute urgency to deal with this at all, and a lot of other councils are in the same position, then the proposal is that we take no action just now, but revisit this at the next self-assessment, because we have to do this on an annual basis, which arrangements will be made for the membership of this committee to carry out that self-assessment. The thinking is it's not about kicking the can down the road for the sake of it. The thinking is, as I said, you're all still getting established, finding your feet, etc. And as I've said before at meetings, for what it's worth, from my opinion, doing very well at that. My thinking is that you give yourselves a bit more time to soak it up, to assimilate yourselves, to get an understanding and feel for the role, where there might be gaps, and then take an informed view at the next self-assessment whether or not this is an action you would wish us to take forward and seek to recruit an independent person. Clearly what we're talking about there is an unremunerated post, so it's looking for someone to come in and do it out of the goodness of their heart, and we need to have a conversation, if the committee wants to go down that route, as to exactly what kind of person, with what kind of skills, knowledge, qualifications, whatever, what kind of background you're looking for in order to bring something new and additional to the committee. So the proposal is that we keep it on the plan. The proposal is that we keep it in our minds, And the proposal is really that when you're in a better position to take a view on the pros and cons of bringing in a potential independent member from outside the council, that you take that decision at the next self-assessment when you've maybe got a better understanding of matters and better place to take that informed decision. In terms of the other ones, the second point that was raised at the last self-assessment was a narrow point. It was a fair point, which was after each election, we do the elected members' induction and provide the basic and initial training to support members fulfil their roles on all the committees, including GNS. And one of the previous members had come onto the committee during the term and had highlighted the point we'd missed them out. Possibly due to COVID as well. So that was just a tweaking to make sure that members who come to the committee during its term also get the benefit of that original induction training. And that one's been actioned and it's put in place, and where council, we will now automatically put that in place for any new members who are brought on or replacement members who are brought on. In terms of the third action, again, this is just something that can be considered about feedback. It's considered again good practice that the Governance and Scrutiny Committee should seek to obtain feedback from the people it serves or the community it serves. So that's obviously open to a bit of interpretation, but I think we would all take the view it's the whole of East Ayrshire and all of the people that live in East Ayrshire that the council serves, and that the committee in turn is simply exercising functions on behalf of the council. What we've thought there, the options are kind of limited, and we need to be realistic here. But what we're really proposing is we simply don't reinvent the wheel, but make use of what we have. So members are aware that these meetings are recorded now and have been for a year or two, and that there is therefore the scope for public viewing of the meetings. So one of the proposals would be that if people are watching this, and I won't say God help them, but if people are watching this on a regular basis, then we could certainly invite feedback from those people, from the members of the public, with a bespoke questionnaire or set of questions, and invite response and comment. I'm frightened to say that because God knows what we'll get back, but there's no harm in asking, I suppose, and we can always filter it for public consumption. But that would be one option. And another option would be seeking to canvass the views of the other elected members, recognising that GNS provides the scrutiny function on behalf of the whole council. So therefore you serve the interests of the other 21 who aren't on the committee, and we could maybe see if they have any thoughts as well. So there's not a lot there that we can actually think of. Clearly, if members had any other views on how we might approach that, we're happy to take that on board. But again, the recommendation suggesting that we simply action those now. And then the last one was simply, and this is a tricky one, being honest, because this is members basically not checking their own homework, but in the context of the self-assessment, members themselves forming a view on how effective members thought they were in fulfilling their roles under the last membership, as I say. And it was considered there, put gently, that there might be a bit of room for improvement in some areas. However, I've made the point already that was under previous arrangements, and clearly there has been a wholesale change of membership to the committee, and I think what's important now is what this committee thinks it needs rather than the previous membership. So again, turning to the recommendations then, Chair and members, if you're happy, what we're proposing is to note the progress included, to note the actions relating to the ongoing support for members in their roles will be considered as part of the annual self-assessment. In terms of actions now, to agree to seek feedback from that wider external environment and the performance of the committee in terms of something on the website for feedback from those watching the committee and elected members and potentially officers, and then bring that back. Agree the appointment of an independent member, or consideration of the appointment of an independent member, be deferred just now and pick that up when you do your own first assessment next year, and otherwise to approve the plan based on the fee above, subject to the fee above, and also finally to remit to myself in consultation with the chair to make arrangements for next year's annual self-assessment in and around May, including the setting of a date. And happy to take any questions or queries or points of clarification, Chair.
Thanks, David. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say to David, I really like that idea about, I mean, I know probably like most people in this room, there aren't thousands of people out there watching this meeting online, but there are people out there who are, you know, maybe in the minority, but there are people out there who are very interested in what the council are doing, and it will get a few views. So I really like the idea, David, about having something online where if a member of the public has watched this and sees a conversation that they think, oh, I want to ask a question about that. I think that's a great idea, having something on the website that the public can actually get involved. And I know my hunch is you won't get loads and loads of feedback, but there are people, there are the odd person out there who's very interested in what the council are doing. So I think that's I would back that 100%. I think it's a great idea.
Councillor Richardson, any other questions or comments for David? No. So can we agree the recommendations? Page 149. Yep. Okay, thank you very much. And that ends today's meeting. Thank you everybody for your input. Okay, have a nice weekend. Thanks to officers. Thank you. Thank you.